Chapter 1148. Under the relentless attacks, more and more captive soldiers were cut down by the wooden scimitars and fell off their horses. In less than half an hour, all 100 captive soldiers had fallen off their horses. On the other hand, only 2 of the 4 groups of soldiers had fallen off their horses. Moreover, they had only been hit on the arms and were not seriously injured. In comparison, the difference in strength was obvious. The captive soldiers who were clamoring to teach the 5-star army a lesson all lowered their heads. Only now did they realize that even if the enemy did not use any tricks, they would still be the ones to lose in a direct battle. Tong Long saw everything with his eyes. When he saw the 5-star army working together so closely, he revealed an envious expression. It could not be helped. Tong Long was an all-rounder. It was not that he had never thought of using cavalry to fight together, but the soldiers under him were all arrogant and unruly. In addition, they had not met any worthy opponents. It was too difficult to gather them together for training. No matter what, the 5-star army had taught them a lesson. Seeing this, many of the captive soldiers were already convinced. However, as their commander, Tong Long naturally would not be so easily convinced. Seeing that no one stood out to challenge him, he held the wooden scimitar in his hand and said to Bai Shuang, who was wearing a black cloak, "You should be the commander of these people. Since that is the case, I will challenge you. Do you dare to accept?" "Hee, I have already lost to you once. Why should I be afraid of you?" Bai Shuang laughed loudly as he spurred his horse forward. For safety reasons, he did not hold his spear. Instead, he held a pair of wooden scimitars and rode out on his horse. Dual blades? Seeing Bai Shuang come out with dual blades, Tong Long was stunned at first. Then he laughed loudly. It seemed that dual blades were naturally more powerful than a single blade. However, this was a battle on horseback. If one was not careful and did not control his strength well, he would fall off the horse. Was he not afraid of such a problem with dual blades? "What? Are you afraid? Or should I give you a blade?" Bai Shuang smiled lightly. He did not show any displeasure because of the other party's mockery. "There is no need for that. But let me remind you, with dual blades in hand, you won't have the chance to control your warhorse. I'm very strong, so don't blame me if I knock you off your horse." Tong Long had never used dual blades before, so he naturally wouldn't do that. However, for the sake of a fair battle, he could not help but remind White Shuang. Little did he know that in order to become a soldier of the 1st Cavalry Division, the first thing one needed to do was to learn how to use dual blades. Without this ability, one would never be able to enter the division. As the leader of one of the regiments, although White Shuang's dual blade techniques were not the best, he was still stronger than ordinary warriors. He had this confidence. "Thanks for the reminder. Can we begin?" Bai Shuang said nonchalantly. "All right, you have to be careful." Seeing that White Shuang was still holding dual blades and had no intention of changing, Tong Long snorted coldly and urged his horse forward. Although he was still a distance away, he waved his blades several times. It was obvious that he was preparing for the final battle. It was often seen in movies or TV series that when cavalry charged, they would habitually wave their weapons while still a distance away. This was not to show off, but to brace themselves. This was to maximize the strength of their bodies. This way, they would be able to maximize their strength when fighting with their opponents. Like Tong Long, White Shuang had already raised his dual blades and shouted loudly. He did not have any intention of underestimating Tong Long. This was also Yang Chindong's request for them. Even when facing the weakest opponent, they had to give their all. Only then would they be able to remain undefeated. The wind and the crane were jittery. At this moment, even the wind seemed to have stopped. It was just watching the battle between the 2 warriors, waiting for the result of the battle. Dang, dang, dang. The distance of 2 li was covered in the blink of an eye. Soon, the 2 of them collided. Then, the sound of weapons clashing rang out. Every time there was a loud bang, the 2 of them would involuntarily move. They were releasing all the power that the other party had imbued into their bodies through their weapons. Although they were holding wooden scimitars, the 2 of them were playing with them as if they were made of iron. In a short period of time, the 2 of them had exchanged no less than 20 rounds, and there was still no clear winner. Tong Long was indeed a fierce general. His blade skills were strong and powerful, and the strength in his body was endless. It gave people the feeling that he was an unending mountain. On the other hand, Bai Shuang was able to become Yang Chendong's student and was appointed as the commander of the strongest cavalry, the 1st Cavalry Division's 4th Regiment. His strength was not ordinary either. After exchanging 20 moves, his expression did not change and his heart was not panting. It was obvious that he had not used his full strength. Tian, who was the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. Under his strict requirements, as long as the conditions allowed, every cavalry soldier would swing their blades at least 1,000 times a day. Even in between battles, this rule had never changed. With this kind of hard training, swinging their blades seemed to have become an instinct. Every time they swung their blades, they would need to use their full strength. However, it was only 20 moves, which was equivalent to an adult man running about 5 meters. It was really nothing. 30 rounds. 40 rounds. 50 rounds. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had exchanged nearly 60 rounds. Under the situation where they used all their strength, the scales of victory began to tilt. Tong Long, who was originally full of fighting spirit, began to feel weak. Although Tong Long also trained regularly, especially on horseback, the training time was not short. However, compared to Bai Shuang's training time, it was still a little short. The main difference was that they lacked a training atmosphere. For example, why did many outstanding soldiers' physical fitness begin to decline after they retired from the army? Even if they did not exercise when they returned home, why was it the same? Speaking of this, it had to be the environment, which was the element of atmosphere. When they were in the army, they had many comrades to accompany them. While they were chasing each other and could not slack off, training also became a kind of work and interest. However, when they were alone, it was completely different. Without a comparison, they might involuntarily want to rest for a while when they were tired. As time passed, naturally, the gap between them would become bigger and bigger. It was precisely because Tong Long did not have such a good environment that he could match Bai Shuang in a short period of time. However, as time passed, the disadvantage became more and more obvious. This was especially so after 50 rounds when White Shuang used 2 swords. Under the continuous attacks, he could only defend himself and could not attack. When all the soldiers who were watching saw this, they could basically see the outcome of the battle. Some of the captives who had placed their hopes on General Tong Long had no choice but to lower their heads. Even the strongest person on their side was not a match for the other party. How could they fight this battle? Sure enough, it was as everyone expected. In the 65th round, Tong Long, who had been bitterly defending, finally revealed a flaw. Because his blade was not fast enough, the hole in his chest was wide open. Using this opportunity, Bai Shuang chopped down and hit him in the chest. If Bai Shuang had not held back, just this attack alone would not have taken his life, but at least a few of his ribs would have been broken. With a plop, Tong Long finally fell off his horse. When he fell to the ground, he was still panting heavily. It could be felt that the battle just now had exhausted him. Swoosh! A wooden blade accurately pressed 30 centimeters in front of Tong Long's throat. Then Bai Shuang's voice sounded. You lost. Yes, I lost. I am willing to repay my loss. I want to join your 5-star army. I don't know if that is possible. Tong Long did not have the dispirited appearance of a loser. On the contrary, although he was still panting heavily and his chest was heaving up and down, his eyes were shining brightly. Clearly, he felt that he had found the direction of his life. Seeing that Tong Long was not discouraged after being defeated, Bai Shuang chuckled and sheathed his saber. Of course, the 5-star army welcomes anyone with insight and ability to join. I think we will be comrades in the future. Bai Shuang had accepted Tong Long, and this made the other captives see hope as well. Immediately, there were many who wanted to join the 5-star army, and the seemingly dangerous competition ended with a unanimous decision. Because of this, the 5-star army had an additional 2,000 cavalrymen. Among them, there were at least 1,000 of them who were elites. What they lacked was the corresponding training. Once they understood how to cooperate in battle, there was no doubt that they would be a strong army. Just like that, Tong Long joined the 5-star army. He was even appointed as a company commander by Bai Shuang. He led 100 elite cavalrymen under him. This time, he was the one who requested to return to the Jian province left guard. He wanted to perform meritorious deeds. A company commander was not enough to satisfy him. He wanted to take over the Jian province left guard and give it to Bug Nam of Gojoseon as a gift. After seriously listening to his son's story, Tongxing really did not know what to say at this moment. Although he had seen the problems of corruption in the Great Ming Dynasty and the bitter lives of the people, the Great Ming Dynasty was still the Great Ming Dynasty. They had a population of 60 million and an army of millions. Such a huge force would undoubtedly be the best target to rely on. But now, his son had chosen Bugnam of Gojoseon, who was the enemy of the Great Ming Dynasty. It was simply unrealistic and impossible for him to immediately express his support. Tong Sheng stood there for a long time without saying anything. Tong Long guessed his father's thoughts and knew that there were some things that needed to be said. This was because without his father's support, his plan could not be completed. He immediately said, "Father, you know about the Japanese Empire, right? Now, he has completely submitted to Bugnam of Gojoseon. In the future, there will be no Japanese Empire. There will only be the Japanese province. It will become a part of Bugnam of Gojoseon's territory." "Father, I'm afraid you still don't know. Bugnam of Gojoseon has already taken over Terran City. Among them, Commander Song Quan committed suicide, Commander Tongji Zhongchang was killed, and Commander Yi Ligong became a general in the 5-star army. Bugnam of Gojoseon has already given the order to change the Liaodong region into the 3 eastern provinces. Yi Ligong has also become the first general of the 3 eastern provinces." Chapter 1149. Right now, Wu Nanking is leading his army towards us. Do you think that we can stop them with just our strength? If we don't make the right choice now, I'm afraid Song Quan and Zhong Cheng will be our examples, father. The information was like a huge wave hitting Tong Sheng's heart, causing his expression to change again and again. First, it was because of the isolation of information. For the sake of the overall situation, it was difficult for unfavorable news to spread to the city. Secondly, in the social environment at that time, many things often took a long time to be known by everyone. Therefore, Tong Sheng had never heard of these things that his son said. After hearing this for the first time, he was inexplicably shocked. What kind of people were the Japanese Empire? Perhaps the people in the hinterland of the Great Ming Dynasty didn't know much about them. But as the Jianghu left guard in the Liaodong region, Tong Sheng, who was in business, knew very well. When he was transporting goods, he saw the Japanese Empire invading the border with his own eyes. He saw many Han people and Nuzanren die tragically in their hands. As for the strength of Song Quan and the others, he was even more clear. As the commander of the entire Liaodong region in name, Song Quan was still very prestigious among the people. But he didn't expect these people to be forced to commit suicide. Thinking about how it had only been 4 months since the 5-star army appeared here, how could he not be surprised? Just how powerful was the 5-star army? How could they attack a city in such a short period of time as if they were invincible? If such a powerful army really set their sights on the Jianghu left guard, would they be able to hold on? As the saying goes, those who recognize the times are wise. To be able to rely on a pair of hands to fight from nothing to now, Tong Sheng relied on the right choice. Now he had another chance to choose. His son was already an officer in the 5-star army. Although he was only a company commander and didn't have much power, it was still a start. At this time, as a father, how could he go against his son? After listening to this, Tong Sheng's mentality had undergone a huge change. What he didn't expect was that Tong Long's next words were like a heavy hammer that strengthened his conviction. "Father, Captain Baishuang has already asked for instructions from Bugnam of Gojoseon and gave a detailed introduction of our family situation. Bugnam of Gojoseon has promised that as long as the Tong family can successfully take over the Jianghu left guard, we will be allowed to do business here in the future. Father, you have to know that the 5-star army sells rare goods. Once you purchase goods from them, you will definitely make a profit. This will only be beneficial to the future development of our Tong family. At that time, one of us will be in business while the other will be in the military. Wouldn't that be the best way to help each other? Father, why are you still hesitating? Please help your son." In a short period of time, Tong Long had revealed all of his trump cards. He even deliberately played with the banknotes worth 500,000 taels of silver in his hand. That was more money than Tong Sheng's lifetime of hard work. Finally, Tong Long's expression changed several times before he nodded heavily and made a decision. "All right, since Bugnam of Gojoseon thinks so highly of us, son, father agrees to help you. Tell me, what do you need me to do?" The father and son discussed together for more than 2 hours. Afterwards, Tong Shang stepped forward and invited all of the influential people in Jianghu left guard city to the Tong residence. Not long after all of the influential people in the military, politics, and business arrived at the Tong residence, they were all surrounded by hundreds of elite soldiers. On one side was a mountain of silver. On the other side was the consequence of shaking their heads and refusing. No one was stupid enough to not know what to choose. The Jianghu left guard changed sides in this lifeless situation. After controlling the situation, Tong Long personally went out of the city to welcome Captain Bai Shuang and his 4,000 men. After the army entered the city, the Baiming army in the city quickly gave up resistance and became a member of the 5-star army. When the news spread and reached the military camp more than 200 miles away, Chen Dula, who was still discussing the plan with General Li Tong, was stunned on the spot. He did not expect such a big thing to happen just because he was not in the city. Naturally, Chen Dula was also glad. If he was not in the city, he would also be faced with a choice and might even lose his head. This is outrageous. Chen Dula angrily slammed his right fist on the desk in front of him. Even though his fist was bleeding, he did not care at all. General Li Tong's face was also full of shock and disbelief. He quickly reacted and asked in surprise, "General Chen, our army's rations seem to be in the city, right? Could it be?" Ah! A howl came from the tent. If one listened carefully, it was Chen Dula's howl. Due to the urgency of the situation, Li Tong's army of 200,000 only brought a small amount of rations. Other than Baiming capital, who was working hard to prepare, the main logistics work was left to Chen Dula. For this reason, he ordered all the rations and extra weapons to be gathered in the Jianghu left guard. Not only that, he also collected taxes from the merchants and civilians in advance. After all, in front of the 5-star army cavalry that liked to fight, there was no place safer than the Jianghu left guard. It was just that no one had expected such a thing to happen so suddenly. Now all the rations were used by the 5-star army. It was a huge loss. Chen Dula reacted quickly after the howl. He reached out and grabbed Li Tong and said, "General Li, the rations and supplies are in the city. We have to get them back. We should take action now that the 5-star army hasn't stabilized. Otherwise, we won't have a chance." Li Tong naturally knew the importance of the rations. If they couldn't get them back, his army of 200,000 would only have 5 days of rations. At that time, the morale of the army would be shaken even before Bugnam of Gojoseon did anything. "Okay, I'll immediately send troops to the Jianghu left guard. No matter what, we have to get this city back." After an emergency meeting, Li Tong gave Chen Dula 30,000 soldiers and hurried to the Jianghu left guard. Li Tong followed behind with the remaining 100,000 soldiers. No matter what, they had to get the Jianghu left guard back. They also had to get the rations and supplies back in their hands. In the Jianghu left guard city, Commander Bai Shuang sat at the head of the table. Looking at the situation in the city sent by his subordinates, he rubbed his forehead with a headache. Even Bai Shuang didn't expect that he would get so much rations and supplies just because he wanted to occupy the Jianghu left guard city and find a safe place for his teacher who was about to arrive. This sudden turn of events made Bai Shuang's face flash with joy, but at the same time, she became worried. He knew that the Baiming army wouldn't leave so many things in their hands. It was very likely that they had already received the news and sent troops here. "Come, quickly inform the division commanders and report the situation here. Commander Tong, please immediately summon all the surrendered Baiming army soldiers to the city. I want to talk to them. Elder Tong, I'll have to trouble you to do some logistics work. There is a lot of rations in the city. You can take as much as you want, but you must ensure that the soldiers have 3 meals a day. Is that okay?" Orders were given one after another. At this moment, Bai Shuang took on the role of a division commander. He changed from a horse attack to a battle of defending the city. Everything happened so suddenly, but he really had no choice. If he didn't have a choice, then so be it. At this moment, Bai Shuang's eyes were shining. Wasn't it what he had always wanted to be able to command so many people to fight a battle of defending the city? He wanted to prove to everyone that as Yang Chendong's student, he could not only kill the enemy immediately, but he could also be an excellent infantry soldier who defended the city even if he dismounted from his horse. The so-called, so many people, naturally didn't refer to how many people Bai Shuang had brought this time. It meant that there were many infantry soldiers in the Jianghu left guard city. The Jianghu Left Guard City belonged to the Guard Command Division and had 5,600 soldiers. This time, only 600 soldiers followed the commander Chen Do out of the city. Excluding the 2,000 soldiers Tong Long had brought with him, there were still 3,000 infantry soldiers in the city. With 3,000 infantrymen, 2,000 men from Bai Shuang's 4 regiments, and 2,500 captives, they had a total of 8,000 soldiers. Furthermore, they were defending the city, so it wasn't necessarily impossible for them to fight. Furthermore, he didn't need to eliminate the enemy. As long as he waited for Division Commander Tian, who to bring the main force of the division to reinforce them, all the problems would be easily solved. He had learned many things from Yang Chendong, and one of them was confidence. Using his teacher's words, confidence might not guarantee victory, but without confidence, one would definitely lose. After arranging everything, Bai Shuang felt that it was about time. He led the 5-star army out of the residence and arrived at the city gates. There were already thousands of Baiming soldiers gathered here. They stood densely together, and their faces were filled with confusion. They had already surrendered to the 5-star army. They didn't understand why they were gathered here so quickly. Considering that everyone's weapons had been confiscated, some people were worried. They were afraid that the 5-star army would suddenly turn hostile. If that was the case, then wouldn't they be at the mercy of others? As such, many people turned their gaze to General Tong Long, who was commanding the troops. From their point of view, he should be one of them, so he wouldn't be too ruthless. Not long after, Bai Shuang led a group of elite cavalry and arrived at the city gates. He only took a quick glance before walking up the city gate tower. When he could see everything below, he stopped and raised his right hand. Following this action, the 3,000 Baiming army below the city gate tower became very quiet. Seeing that everyone was so obedient, a smile flashed across Bai Shuang's face. He then looked into the distance and saw that Tong Shang had already gathered many civilians to watch. On the other side, large pots had been set up, and pieces of delicious fatty meat were thrown into the pots. Chapter 1150. Now that everything was ready, Bai Shuang's voice came down from the city gate tower. Soldiers, I've called everyone here today to tell you that the Jianghu Left Guard is now under the control of the 5-star army, and you will soon become a member of the 5-star army. Our 5-star army belongs to Bugnam of Gojoseon. Bugnam of Gojoseon never mistreats his subordinates, so after asking for instructions, we've decided to give each soldier 5 taels of silver. The amount is the same, so please don't think it's too little. Alright, now everyone can line up to get the silver. Elder Tong, I'll have to trouble you. No problem, it's already prepared. Tong Shang, who already knew about Bai Shuang's plan, smiled. Then, he gave an order and the wooden boxes placed there were opened. White light flashed, and boxes of silver were placed in front of everyone. Wow, so much silver. Yes, I've never seen so much silver in my life. Shouts of surprise continued. When a large amount of silver was placed in front of them, the impact was still very strong. Alright, everyone, don't just sigh. The silver is only real when it's in your hands. Now, please line up and get the silver. Of course, I want to say that from the moment you receive the silver, you will be a glorious soldier of the 5-star army. If anyone is unwilling, you can leave now. I promise that no one will make things difficult for you. Bai Shuang seemed to be talking about a very ordinary matter. But these words were not the case in the ears of the soldiers. What a joke! Who would refuse money? As for whether they were in the 5-star army or the Baiming army, what difference did it make? As long as they were given money and treated well, they would listen to them and work for them. Most of the soldiers of the Great Ming Dynasty were formed from military families. In other words, their fathers were military families, and most of their sons would become soldiers when they grew up. This was originally set by the Great Ming Dynasty's Emperor Taizu because he was afraid that there would be no soldiers to recruit. Therefore, after a long period of habit, these people had already accepted the fact that they had to be paid as soldiers. As for whether or not they would go to war after becoming soldiers, and who they would fight against, that was not something they could consider or choose. Usually, the soldiers of the Baiming army were only paid 2 taels of silver a month. Even so, there were times when they couldn't even get paid. Now that each person could receive 5 taels of silver in cash, no one would refuse such a good deal. Bai Shuang looked around and saw that none of the 3,000 people left on their own accord. They all obediently lined up to receive their silver. 3,000 people. 5 taels per person. That would be 15,000 taels of silver. This amount of money was really nothing to Bai Shuang. In his opinion, it was worth it to pay such a small price to defend the city. Even if his teacher knew about this matter, he would only praise him for being capable. There were a total of 10 teams, and everything was over in less than an hour. When Bai Shuang saw that all the soldiers had smiles on their faces with the silver in their hands, he continued, "Congratulations, everyone. You are now a member of the 5-star army. I just want to say that there will be many more good things like this in the future. As long as you work hard on the battlefield, you will receive more than this. Everyone, are you happy?" Happy. The soldiers who had just received their silver naturally stood in front of Bai Shuang and replied loudly, "Very good." Bai Shuang saw that everyone had fallen into his trap, so he laughed and said, "Soldiers of the 5-star army, to tell you the truth, the Baiming army will soon arrive at the city. They will most likely prepare to attack the city. In other words, your opportunity to perform has arrived." What? Are we really going to fight? Yes, or are we going to fight the Baiming army? We are the Baiming army, aren't we? Baiming army, my ass. We are now captives of the 5-star army. Captives, do you understand? We have no choice but to fight for power. What? Now that we have received our silver, we are no longer captives. We are now members of the 5-star army. Because of this sentence, the soldiers below began to discuss. In the end, Bai Shuang raised his right hand and calmed the crowd down. "Soldiers, I know that you may have some thoughts. But what I want to say is that you have already surrendered to the 5-star army. It doesn't matter if you did it willingly or not, but it is the truth. At least, the Baiming army outside the city will think this way. Once the city is breached, it will be the time of your death. I don't think anyone will be merciful to soldiers who have surrendered to the enemy. Therefore, the next battle will be fought for your own sake." Seeing how certain Bai Shuang was, some soldiers who didn't want to die opened their mouths and said, We were only forced." Is that so? Bai Shuang had already expected this result. He smiled and said, "But when you took the silver, you were very proactive. Everyone in the city saw it." Indeed, Bai Shuang didn't force anyone. When they took the silver, they all did it willingly. They were all very excited and happy. After he finished speaking, some of the Baiming soldiers who wanted to argue shut their mouths. Using this opportunity, Bai Shuang's expression suddenly changed as he said, "You think you were forced, but will the Baiming army think this way? Will the generals think this way? They will only think of you as the real 5-star army. Then they will kill you and chop off your heads to give them rewards." As soon as he said this, the soldiers below were all shocked. Baiming rewarded soldiers based on military merits, and military merits were closely related to the enemy's head. When that time came, no one would be able to tell whether they were the 5-star army or the Baiming army. Seeing that everyone was silent, Bai Shuang smiled in his heart. He knew that his plan had succeeded. He had given them the stick, and now it was time to give them the carrot. He immediately said in a loud voice, "Soldiers, whether you are willing or not, the truth can't be changed. Since we are all going to war, why not help the 5-star army? You should know that what we are giving you is much more than what the Baiming army gave you. Everyone can turn around and look. On your left, there is a burning cauldron. There is a lot of delicious food inside, and everyone can eat until they are full. On your right, there are countless boxes that haven't been opened yet. There is an uncountable amount of silver inside. As long as you achieve military merits on the battlefield, you can immediately come and collect it. These are things that the Baiming army can't give you. What is there to hesitate about? A person's life was nothing more than wearing clothes and eating food. Those who joined the military only wanted to live a better life and rely on their own efforts to obtain more glory. Now that Bai Shuang had given them all, there was nothing to worry about. Many soldiers were shocked by what they saw. Even if they worked hard for the Baiming army, they wouldn't be able to eat their fill. Sometimes, they wouldn't even get paid on time. But now, not only could they eat their fill, but they also had enough meat. If they obtained military merits, they would be directly rewarded with silver. Under these conditions, it was very easy for them to make a choice. While most of the people were already tempted, there were still a small number of people who were hesitating. One of them shouted loudly in the crowd, "General, how can you guarantee that we will be given money if we make military contributions?" Bai Shuang didn't answer this question. With his status, it was useless to say anything. Thus, he looked at Tong Long, who was already a company commander. "I can answer this question. I can guarantee it on behalf of the Tong family." Tong Long spoke up in a timely manner. With his influence, no one doubted his words. Thus, no one objected. Instead, everyone started arguing about who would be the first to defend the city. To be honest, everyone was afraid of death. But from the day they became soldiers, they no longer had a choice. All they wanted was to obtain the treatment they deserved after obtaining military merits. Now, the opportunity was right in front of them. Bai Shuang also said that no matter who died in battle, the 5-star army would give their family 20 taels of silver. Based on this, why wouldn't they fight with their lives on the line? If they died, they could leave something for their family. Chapter 1151. His voice was not soft, but he was met with silence. How could the Baiming army soldiers, who had been convinced and successfully tempted by Bai Shuang, betray him just because of a few words? What's wrong? Don't you understand what I'm saying? I've treated you well all these years. Hurry up and open the city gate. Otherwise, once I lead the army into the city, none of you will be spared. Even your families will be implicated. Is that what you want to see? Chen Dula saw that his order was ignored, so he angrily threatened them. Needless to say, this shout did have some effect. For the ordinary Baiming soldiers, Chen Dula had always been a superior existence. They had to carefully ponder the words of such a person. Although Bai Shuangshu had given them a lot of benefits, if the Zhenzhou left guard was defeated, these benefits would be gone. This was something they didn't dare to think about. In a corner of the city gate tower, Bai Shuang was watching Chen Dula's act. When he saw that the other party was even threatening him, he could not help but coldly snort. Then he said to a soldier beside him, "Pass down the order. It's time to teach this commander a lesson." The order flag on the city gate tower was waved. Immediately, the west gate of the Jian province left guard was opened. When the thick and heavy city gate creaked, Chen Dula, who still wanted to continue his threats, immediately smiled. "Haha, can't we talk nicely? Why do I have to scare you? Sigh, these soldiers are really despicable." After these words came out of his mouth, Chen Dula suddenly widened his eyes. Then, without any scruples, he turned around and fled. He had already seen that the people who came out of the city gate were not ordinary Baiming soldiers, but thousands of cavalrymen led by Tong Long. The Jian province left guard was easily taken down by the 5-star army because of Tong Long. Chen Dula already knew about this. Now that he saw this person riding out, how could he not know what was going to happen? Considering that this person had always been very brave, and even Chen Dula was no match for him in a one-on-one fight, if not now, when would he be able to escape? Just as Chen Dula turned to flee, so anxious that he didn't even notify his personal guards, Tong Long had already led his 25,000 cavalry out of the west gate. At this moment, Tong Long had already been appointed as a battalion commander by Bai Shuang, and the cavalry that originally belonged to him had been returned to him. This kind of trust and use made Tong Long shed tears of gratitude. He swore in his heart that he would definitely perform well. Therefore, at this moment, he rushed out with all his might. If Chen Dula had not seen the situation and fled quickly, he might have really been left behind by him. Although Chen Dula managed to escape, it was a pity that he only brought a dozen men with him. Apart from 2 of them who managed to escape quickly, the rest of them were all captured. One of them even tried to hold Tong Long back by relying on his martial strength, but was beheaded with a single slash. His goal was not to scare Chen Dula away. Using this opportunity to leave the city, Tong Long led his 2,500 cavalry and charged straight at the 30,000 Baiming army that were completely unprepared. This was not going according to the script at all. The 30,000 Baiming army were also confused. They were supposed to be the ones attacking, but now they were the ones being attacked. Since they were completely unprepared, and the 30,000 infantrymen that came were all infantrymen, Tong Long destroyed their first line of defense in just one exchange. If it wasn't for the fact that the 30,000 men were so crowded that they couldn't retreat even if they wanted to, they might have been directly scattered. On the city gate tower, Bai Shuang saw everything. When he saw that the 30,000 Beiming infantrymen were actually so weak, his eyes couldn't help but light up. Originally, he thought that since the enemy had so many people, he should focus on defense. He never thought that an opportunity would appear in front of him. How could he be polite? He immediately led his men down the city gate tower, and then led the 2,000 five-star army cavalry that were already prepared for battle and charged out of the city. Originally, Tong Long was prepared to take advantage of the situation and leave. However, he didn't receive the signal to retreat. Then, he saw Bai Shuang leading his army and charging out. At this moment, if he still didn't know what to do, then he would have led his troops in vain. Brothers, continue to attack. Commander Bai is here to support us. Tong Long shouted as he continued to urge his horse to attack. He did his best to maintain the momentum of the charge and not give the Beiming army a chance to counterattack and regain their morale. In less than half an incense stick's worth of time, Bai Shuang led his 2,000 men from the 1st Cavalry Division over. If Tong Long and his men's attack was like a light rain and a level 4 wind, then their appearance was like a rainstorm and a level 7 wind. They unsheathed their swords and slashed out more than 10 times in a short period of time. Especially with the help of the array formation at the tip of the arrows, they quickly pierced through the defense of the northern Ming army. When the second layer of the human wall was also broken down, and before the third layer of the human wall was completely built, they began to kill. Even though Yang Chendong had said before that if possible, they should try not to kill the Han soldiers. However, this was a matter of life and death, and they couldn't care less. In this battle of life and death, the 2,000 cavalry of the No. 1 Cavalry Division fully displayed their bravery, and what it meant to be unstoppable. Under the storm-like attacks, the formation attacks were like arrows piercing through the air. One by one, the Beiming army soldiers were cut down to the ground, and the soldiers who wanted to establish a defensive line were sent flying by the charge of their war horses. As their morale continued to soar, the advantage of the 5,000 cavalry became greater and greater, and the morale of the Beiming army began to waver. No one knew who was the first to turn and flee, but it caused a chain reaction that caused the entire army to collapse. The 30,000 Beiming army did not even have a chance to stand firm before they were defeated. Riding on his warhorse, Chen Dula still had a look of lingering fear on his face. Seeing that the situation was over, he knew that there was no way to turn the situation around. He could only hatefully turn and leave. Since their general had left, how could the soldiers under him continue to risk their lives? It was really death, escape, death, and injury. The 30,000 soldiers left behind a ground full of corpses and captives, and in the end, only 10,000 managed to escape. With 4,500 cavalry, not only had they defeated the 30,000 Beiming army, they had also killed 5,000 and captured 15,000. This kind of accomplishment caused the surrendered Beiming army soldiers to be dumbfounded. In the past, they had been talking about how powerful the 5-star army was. This time, they had really opened their eyes. The capture of captives and the cleaning of the battlefield continued until nighttime. Even so, it was still not completely cleaned up. Considering that there was no one in Jianghu's Wuwei city who belonged to him, Bai Shuang still brought his men back to the city. Seeing their return, everyone looked at them with respect. When Bai Shuang saw Tong Shang at the city gate leading the people to welcome him, he first laughed and then said, "Everyone has worked hard in this battle. In a while, we will reward you according to your contributions. Don't worry, even the soldiers who defended the city will be rewarded. By the way, the battlefield outside the city has not been cleaned up yet. If there are any people who want to help, you can go now. Don't worry, you only need to hand over 80% of the things you picked up. The remaining 20% is yours." What? Is this true? The people who were originally lining the streets to welcome them were shocked when they heard this. They were not here to support the 5-star army. Although they had won the battle and protected Jianghu's Wuwei city, in the eyes of most people, even if Chindula took back this place, they would not be too surprised or flustered. After all, they were just ordinary people. To them, it did not matter who the emperor was. The reason why they came here was because Tong Shang promised to share the meat soup that the soldiers drank. This was the real benefit. But now, they suddenly heard that they could also get benefits. Moreover, they could get 20% of whatever they took. This was something that they had never thought of before. That's right. Our 5-star army will definitely keep our word. I just want to remind everyone that the things you took must be handed over to the government. Once someone is found to have embezzled, It will be a crime. Then there will be a big problem. Other people can also supervise each other. If you find out, you can report it. As the informant, you can get 50% of the things as a reward. Bai Shuang used the set of rules that he saw when he was with Yang Chendong. Back then, when he asked the people to clean up the battlefield, he used this method. Although it could not completely eliminate embezzlement, more than 90% of the things could be retrieved. Of course we will do such a good thing. Don't worry, with us here, we will definitely not let anyone take things home. That's right, such a good thing cannot be ruined because of one or two people. We have to be conscious and supervise each other. These words quickly attracted the support of the people. After that, there was no welcoming ceremony. Even though the sky was already dark, there were still many commoners who left the city with torches and ran towards the battlefield outside the city. There was a lot of wealth waiting for them there. If they could pick up some iron weapons, they would definitely be able to sell them to the 5-star army for a good price. When most of the people had left, Tong Shang came to Bai Shuang with a worried face. Commander Bai, are we really going to let the people help? Once they have money, will they listen to our orders? Just like just now, if it wasn't for the meat soup, I'm afraid that they wouldn't have come out to welcome the victorious army. Tong Shang's thinking had become a common problem among the people in power. They didn't want the people to be so poor that they couldn't even afford to eat, but they also didn't want them to be so rich that they wouldn't listen to their orders. But they didn't know that if a country really wanted to be rich and powerful, they had to learn how to hide their wealth from the people. As long as the people had money in their hands, they would protect their rights and interests from being violated. When faced with an invading enemy, they would do their best to protect them. It wouldn't be like now where no one cared about the outcome of the war. Chapter 1152. These words were said by Yang Chendong, so Bai Shuang naturally believed them without a doubt. Now that he saw Tong Shang so anxious, he comforted him and said, "Don't worry, everything is under control. By the way, Elder Tong, thank you for helping to defend the city this time. I will definitely report your contribution. I'm sure Bugnam of Gojoseon won't mistreat you." Speaking of his own matters, Tong Shang was a little reserved. He smiled and said, well said, well said. Not to mention what happened in Zhenzhou's left guard city. Chen Dula had only run a few dozen miles when he met General Li Tong, who came to his rescue. He brought a total of 170,000 Baiming army with him. Originally, he thought that if everything went smoothly, he could directly take over the Zhenzhou left guard. However, when he saw Chen Dula's sorry state and the number of troops that were obviously less than when he sent out his troops, he frowned. General Chen, it seems that everything is not going well. Sigh, the other party didn't play by the rules. My troops were defeated. Chen Dula seemed to have aged a lot in an instant. After all, many of the cavalry that chased after him were originally soldiers of the Zhenzhou left guard, which meant that they were his troops. He had been the commander of the Zhenzhou left guard for many years and thought that he was in control of everything. However, now that he was defeated by his own troops, one could imagine how depressed and disappointed he was. What exactly happened? Li Tong said with an unfriendly expression. This was an army of 30,000, and now only 1/3 of them had returned. The difference was too great. Although it was a little embarrassing, it had already happened and there was no way to hide it. Therefore, Chen Dula explained everything in detail. In the end, he said, the cavalry of the 5-star army is indeed powerful. Although we have the advantage in numbers, without preparation, we can't use our advantage in numbers at all. This time, I was careless and thought that the other party wouldn't dare to make a move. General Li, I beg for your forgiveness. Li Tong's expression was very ugly. He wanted to say that he was indeed guilty. He had lost 20,000 troops in an instant and even deserved death. However, Li Tong didn't dare to punish him for his crimes. Putting aside the fact that Chen Dula was a third-rank military official in the Imperial court, just like him, he didn't have the authority to set up a court. Furthermore, this was the Liaodong region, and Chen Dula had been operating here for many years. It was impossible to say that he didn't have any connections. If he dared to kill such a person, he would definitely receive the full force of the other guards. If that was the case, it would be strange if he felt good about it. Even if he could not incriminate Chen Dula, Li Tong would not let Chen Dula have a good time. After thinking for a while, he said, General Chen, no matter what, We have lost 20,000 soldiers and horses this time. Moreover, all of our provisions have been taken away. The provisions of our army will not last for more than a few days. Do you think? This was an opportunity for Chen Do to perform meritorious deeds, and also to negotiate conditions. If you don't want to be punished, you have to do something. How could Chen Du La not understand? He immediately patted his chest and promised, General Li, don't worry. I am very familiar with this area. Whoever has money and provisions is in my heart. How about this? I will go find them now and collect taxes again. Then I will have to trouble you, General Chen. Li Tong was waiting for this sentence. Only at this moment did his expression become better. The two of them immediately divided the work. They decided that tomorrow morning, Li Tong would lead his troops out of the Jian province left guard and try to take over the place. Chen Du La would go to the nearby area to collect provisions. No matter what, they couldn't let the army starve. Not to mention the process of collecting provisions and the resentment of the people by Chen Du La's 10,000 soldiers. Li Tong and his army of 170,000 arrived at Jian province left guard city the next morning. From afar, banners were fluttering in the wind, and soldiers were standing guard. It looked like they were ready for battle. Looks like the other side has a lot of soldiers. How about this? Arrange someone to call the city. Oh right, before you go, you must prepare the defense, especially the horse-repelling stakes. You must arrange more of them. With the previous example of Chen Du La's army being defeated, Li Tong didn't dare to be careless. That's right, Jian province left guard seemed to have a lot of soldiers standing guard. What Li Tong didn't know was that most of them were his comrades in the Baiming army yesterday. It turned out that Bai Shuang was still worried about the lack of soldiers. In yesterday's battle, he directly took 15,000 captives. He used the method of giving them money to win them over. This time, he didn't give them much money, only 2 taels per captive. In his words, they would be heavily rewarded after they achieved military merits. The Baiming captives firmly believed this point. Because just last night, they saw with their own eyes that the 3,000 captive soldiers of the Zhenzhou left guard left behind in the city. Although they didn't leave the city to fight, because of their contribution to the defense of the city, each of them was rewarded with 1 tael of silver. They didn't do anything, but they received money. Such a good thing really happened in front of them. Just based on this, everyone believed in Bai Shuang's words. With the addition of these 15,000 captives, Bai Shuang was full of confidence. He was no longer thinking about how to defend the city, but how to cooperate with the 1st Cavalry Division's main force to destroy the Baiming army. The persuasion to surrender began. A Baiming emissary who was eloquent came to the city and shouted loudly. It was nothing more than that if they surrendered now, they could live. Otherwise, once the city was captured, everyone who helped the 5-star army would be punished and so on. These words could be said to be useless. On the contrary, under this threat, it only made the captives rely on the 5-star army even more. Bai Shuang watched from the city gate tower without any intention of stopping. This gave the Baiming emissary even more confidence. He thought that Bai Shuang was really afraid. As a result, his threats became even more intense. When the soldiers on the city gate were about to get anxious, Bai Shuang saw that the time was right and ordered to shoot arrows. This scared away the Baiming emissary who came to persuade them to surrender. Since the persuasion failed, Li Tong had no choice but to start a siege. In order to show his military strength as much as possible, he prepared 4 echelons, each with 5,000 men. They would attack the city in turns. He wanted to let the 5-star army know how powerful he was and not give them any time to rest. In the end, he would win by exhausting them. Since ancient times, the side that attacked the city would always be at a disadvantage. After all, they had to charge into a dangerous area that was hundreds of meters away. They also had to brave the dangers of arrows, crossbows, and kerosene to reach the city gate tower. With this advantage, Bai Shuang only arranged for 3,000 men to defend the city gate tower at once. He could already see that the other side wanted to fight a war of attrition. Since that was the case, he would play with them. The battle began in the afternoon. Using the ladders that had been prepared beforehand, the northern Ming army launched a frenzied attack on the city. Below the city walls were densely packed soldiers who were charging forward. They shouted loudly and continuously charged forward with swords in their left hand and shields in their right hand. Under the leadership of Bai Shuang, the 5-star army on the city gate tower counterattacked in an orderly manner. From afar, they used bows and arrows. From close range, they used boulders, crossbows, and kerosene. They fully displayed their advantage of being in a high position and repelled the enemy wave after wave. From afternoon to night, 2 groups of 5,000 men were defeated. Facing this result, Li Tong's expression didn't change. This was already within his expectations. However, no matter how much he had to pay, he didn't have any intention of stopping. Strictly speaking, this was his first battle since he came here. He couldn't afford to lose. Under Li Tong's command, even if the sky was completely dark, the attack didn't stop. Everyone used torches to light up the surroundings and continued to attack the city. The battle continued. This battle went on for 3 days and 3 nights without stopping. After 3 consecutive days of attacking the city, there were no victories. Bai Shuang, who was defending the city, lost more than 6,000 Baiming captives in 3 days and 3 nights. Among them, 4,000 were injured and couldn't participate in any battles for a while. On the side attacking the city, Li Tong's army suffered heavier losses. More than 30,000 men were killed or injured. Most of the soldiers were exhausted and their provisions were about to run out. On the 4th day, Chen Dula appeared with a large amount of provisions. These were all gathered from the nearby 30,000 guards and the Songhua River. Considering that he had already collected them once, he naturally encountered a lot of resistance when he collected them this time. In the end, he went from collecting to robbing. With the advantage of 10,000 soldiers, he really managed to get a lot. This could be considered to have completely solved the problem of provisions in the army. Looking at the piles of provisions and the stolen silver, which were like a small mountain, Li Tong finally breathed a sigh of relief. He looked at Chen Dula, whose eyes were bloodshot, and said, "General Chen, you've worked hard." Chen Dula smiled bitterly and said, "It doesn't matter if it's a little hard. However, this second collection will cause a lot of damage to the people nearby. I hope this battle will end soon and give them a chance to recuperate." "It definitely will," Li Tong said confidently. Then, he ordered everyone to cook and prepare a full meal for everyone. Then, they would work hard and strive to take down the Jian Province Left Guard tomorrow. On the tower of the Jian Province Left Guard, the siege was still ongoing. From time to time, screams could be heard. Every scream represented the loss of a soldier's life. This made Bai Shuang, who was below the tower, squint his eyes. Of the 18,000 captives, only a fraction was left. From the looks of it, the price they would have to pay tonight would not be small. If that was the case, how many more days would the city be able to hold out was something that no one could be sure of. This time, Bai Shuang had miscalculated. He had overestimated the combat power of the Baiming captives. He thought that with the high walls of the city, there would be no problem at all to defend the city. However, when the battle really started, it was a completely different matter. The military quality was not good, and they did not know how to cooperate. Some of the soldiers were even very timid. When they saw the densely packed siege army below the city, their legs went soft before the battle. All these changes caused him to suffer such a great loss. If the strength of the Baiming army was not average, it would be hard to say if they could achieve a 3-to-1 ratio. Chapter 1153. After 3 days and 3 nights, they had lost more than half of their forces. If this continued, they would probably lose the city in another 3 days and 3 nights. "Commander, why don't we kill our way out? With the advantage of our cavalry, we should be able to catch them off guard and reduce the pressure on the city." Ever since Tong Long had been promoted to battalion commander, his heart was filled with a desire to perform meritorious deeds. He had noticed that Bai Shuang's black cloak, which represented his status as a regiment commander, was very eye-catching. If he wanted to gain merit, he could only perform well on the battlefield. Fighting outside the city was undoubtedly the best opportunity. How could Bai Shuang not know that a cavalry attack could turn the tide of the battle? However, he did not think that the Baiming army, who had suffered a loss once, would be unprepared. Although he could not see anything from the tower, he had a feeling, or perhaps his sixth sense, that the Baiming army was waiting for their cavalry to leave the city. "Battalion Commander Tong, there is no need to rush. Before we know the enemy's background, any action outside the city is a risk. Unless it is absolutely necessary, we will not take the risk." Considering that there was no evidence, Bai Shuang did not say it clearly. However, when Tong Long heard these words, his face was filled with displeasure. "Commander Bai, you can't be afraid, right? If that is the case, then hand over my 2,500 cavalry and I will go out to fight." Impudent. Bai Shuang suddenly let out a cold snort, and the aura of his entire body was released, shocking Tong Long on the spot. All along, Bai Shuang had given him the impression that he was very refined, even when he was killing enemies on the battlefield. Perhaps this had something to do with the fact that he had learned from Yang Chendong, but this did not mean that he did not have a temper. When people were chatting in private, they could talk about anything. However, when it came to a battle, when it involved the lives of tens of thousands of people, he could not be careless. Otherwise, not only would he die, he would also let down his teacher, who had valued and nurtured him. There can only be one military order in the army. Tong Long, are you going to disobey a military order? Bai Shuang's aura surged as he asked in a thunderous voice. Tong Long himself was indeed somewhat undisciplined. Otherwise, he wouldn't have led 3,000 cavalrymen out of the city despite Chen Dula's disapproval. In the past, he had not taken Chen Dula seriously because the Tong family was powerful enough in the Jianghu left guard. But now, when he faced Bai Shuang, especially when he shouted at him, he unconsciously became a little timid. When he saw that the other party was angry and reprimanded him with military discipline, he quickly cupped his fists and said, "Your subordinate doesn't dare. It's best if you don't dare. I can also tell you clearly that no means no. If you dare to act without permission, even if you come back victorious, you will be punished by military law. The lightest punishment will be 50 beatings, and the heaviest punishment will be beheading. You decide for yourself." Bai Shuang left this sentence and walked towards his small courtyard. There was still a big battle tomorrow, so he had to seize every moment to rest. Tong Long, who was left behind, had an ugly expression on his face. If he sent out troops without permission, he would be punished even if he won. This made his thoughts of doing something wrong disappear instantly. Now that he had betrayed Baiming, if he offended the 5-star army, there would be no place for him in the world. Suppressing the thought of sending out troops alone, Tong Long shook his head and left. In his heart, he was only thinking that if the city was really in danger, Bai Shuang would probably accept his suggestion. Bai Shuang did the right thing this time. This was because Li Tong had already prepared an army of 10,000 men under the Jianghu left guard city. They carried bows and arrows on their backs and formed a semicircle, waiting for the 5-star army's cavalrymen to appear. Then they would surge forward and deal a heavy blow. Considering that Chen Dula's army had been defeated, Li Tong made an extra move. It was a pity that it hadn't been used yet. It didn't matter. Although it hadn't been used, Li Tong wasn't discouraged. In his opinion, since the provisions had been supplied, he only needed to continue attacking the city. With the advantage of military strength, there wouldn't be any place that he couldn't conquer. He had even thought about it. He would launch an even fiercer attack tomorrow morning. He was determined to take down the Jianghu left guard city. This battle would also become a stepping stone for him to come to the Liaodong region. With this battle, he would definitely gain great merit and be valued by the emperor. However, what Li Tong didn't know was that there was a group of black figures gathering on a hill 50 kilometers north of them. If someone happened to see this scene and was able to clearly see who was coming, they would definitely be very surprised. This was because they were the main force of the world-famous 1st Cavalry Division. The people gathered here were the main force of the 1st Cavalry Division, led by Jianghu. It had been more than 3 days since Bai Shuang sent people out to deliver the letter. Relying on their speed, they quickly arrived here. Now, even the closest 5th Regiment had gathered. 8,000 of the most heroic cavalry had appeared. They would form an unstoppable torrent as they rushed towards the target. The soldiers below had temporarily built a house with wood and leaves. Jianghu was staying here. At this moment, he was waiting for Yang Chendong's return telegram. The reconnaissance cavalry sent out earlier had already reported the battle situation of the Jianghu left guards. After learning that Commander Bai Shuang had been guarding the city for nearly 4 days, Jianghu decided to attack immediately. After all, the battlefield was unpredictable, and one mistake could lead to an outcome that no one could predict. Once the Jianghu left guard city was really taken down, the role of the cavalry would be greatly reduced. This was not what Jianghu wanted to see. The telegram had been sent out. After all, this war involved more than 200,000 people. Even Jianghu couldn't act on his own. He had to report it to his superior and get permission. Hasn't the telegram been sent back yet? Half an hour had passed, but there was still no news. Jianghu, who had always been calm, became a little anxious and began to ask for the first time. No. The telegraphist of the 1st Cavalry Division shook his head and continued to stare at the radio station. He didn't dare to miss the slightest movement. Jianghu frowned slightly. He knew about Yang Qindong's situation. There were 3 radio stations around him, and one of them was a motor that could be manually generated. With these, it was impossible for the radio station to run out of power. Then why didn't he call back after receiving the telegram? According to the rules, the army couldn't act rashly without a reply. But if there was no reply, would they have to wait forever? It was not an exaggeration to say that the Jianghu Left Guard city was racing against time. One more day meant one more day of danger. Someone, send another telegram to ask. Jianghu, who was a little anxious, continued to send an order to the telegraphist. What Jianghu didn't know was that 30 kilometers northeast of them, there was a group of cavalrymen rushing towards them at high speed. From afar, they were all dressed in black clothes, black armor, and black cloaks. Streaks of murderous aura constantly collided with the surrounding air. Only one cavalry unit in the world could carry such a murderous aura and be so well equipped. It was Yang Qindong's black cavalry. Just behind these cavalry units, a torrent of bicycles followed. Their speed was not much slower than that of the war horses, and they always maintained a certain distance from the cavalry. If one looked carefully, one would see that these bicyclists were all carrying long objects wrapped in black cloth behind them. What else could they be if they weren't spears? The team was constantly moving forward. Among them, a white horse under a golden cloak was particularly eye-catching. At this moment, beside the white horse, there was also a strong man riding a war horse who was saying something. Young Master, Commander Jianghu just sent another telegram, asking for a battle. Do you want to reply? Haha, this Jianghu is good at everything, but recently, his murderous aura has been too strong. He needs to calm down. This time, just treat it as a training. Don't worry about it, let's continue on our way. Yang Qindong, who was riding on the white dragon, laughed, then shook his head gently. Obviously, he intended to polish Jianghu's temper. After all, he would be entrusted with greater responsibilities in the future. It would be bad if he couldn't keep calm when something happened. After talking about Jianghu, Yang Qindong looked at the dark scene around him and asked in a deep voice, Beta Persei, how far are we from Jianghu's division? Young Master, it's less than 30 miles away. We can arrive in half an hour. Beta Persei replied confidently. Being able to stay by Yang Qindong's side was indeed very impressive, but in reality, the burden was also very heavy. Whether there was something or not, they had to understand it. Very good. Inform the team that there's no need to rush. Try to preserve the team's physical strength as much as possible. This time, we'll test the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division. Yang Qindong smiled. The reason why he didn't reply to the telegram was because he wanted to test them. It was said that the 1st Cavalry Division was very powerful. This time, Yang Qindong wanted to test it himself. The test stone was his own 1,000 Black Knights and the 4th Army Division. The 1,000 Black Knights had just been replenished. Needless to say, those who could join were naturally the strongest. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were the cream of the crop. Who knew how many people their loyalty was? Fortunately, the Chief of Security, Yang Qindong, had been doing this work. There were many candidates to be tested, so they could finish replenishing the Black Knights in such a short time. They took a boat from Crimson City all the way to Yang Qindong's side. However, such people also had a special characteristic. Perhaps they were indeed capable, but they always had a sense of arrogance. Yang Qindong wanted to use this opportunity to test their strength. At the same time, he wanted to warn them that although the Black Knights were strong, if they didn't work hard, they could be overtaken by others. The 4th Army Division was needless to say. Firearms had a natural advantage over cold weapons. In order to suppress the momentum of the 1st Cavalry Division, Yang Qindong specially allowed the 4th Army Division to participate and asked them to use empty shells. Chapter 1154. Commander Ling Daqiang naturally agreed with this order. Cold Front's reputation had been overshadowed countless times by the world's #1 cavalry division. Now that there was such an open and above-board opportunity to take revenge, he naturally wouldn't miss it. In order to achieve the goal of completing the mission, he ordered all the soldiers of the Cold Vanguard to be in their best condition. If anyone dropped the ball, they would be kicked out of the Cold Vanguard. This was no longer just a matter between the 4th Infantry Division and the world's 1st Cavalry Division. It concerned the reputation of the entire Cold Vanguard. Under Yang Chendong's orders, close to 10,000 soldiers quietly arrived. The scouts sent by the 4th Division and the Black Knights were the best scouts. Very quickly, the scouts sent by Tian were eliminated one by one. With the advanced firearms and the speed of the Black Knights, the 1st Cavalry Division was at a disadvantage, at least on the outskirts. Tian was naturally unaware of all this. At this moment, he was still waiting for Yang Chendong's reply. It was almost midnight. Soon, the sun would rise, but there was still no news. Tian was burning with anxiety. Waiting felt like forever. Tian had already drunk at least 5 cups of tea, but there was still no news from the telegraph operator. Just as he was feeling uneasy, the 3rd Regiment Commander Hu Boer arrived outside the tent and said loudly, "Division Commander Hu Boer wishes to see you." "Come in." Tian straightened his body and tried his best to hide his anxiety. Then, he took out the style of a division leader. Hu Boer entered the tent and saw that there was only Tian and the telegraph operator. She immediately understood and asked with concern, "Division Commander, is there still no news from Bugnam of Gojoseon?" No. There was nothing to hide, so Tian admitted it. He then looked at Hu Boer and asked with a smile, "What? Did the 3rd Regiment Commander come just to ask about this?" "Of course not. Master, I'm here to report to you that there seems to be something wrong with tonight's situation." Hesitantly, Hu Boer spoke of her feelings. As a general under the King of the Grassland, Hu Boer did indeed have some ability. Perhaps he was born to fight, but whenever he encountered danger, he would always feel uneasy. This feeling had been proven through countless battles, and it just so happened that tonight, this feeling appeared again. Trusting her 6th sense, Hu Boer was no longer sleepy. She got out of her tent and found Lu Duo, the commander of the 2nd Regiment, who was in charge of guarding the perimeter. She asked him to ask the scouts if there was anything strange. After completing this task, Hu Boer couldn't sleep until she got the results. Seeing that Tian still had some candlelight, she hurried over. "Wrong? What's wrong?" Tian didn't react until he saw the solemn expression on Hu Boer's face. He suddenly stood up and said, "What's wrong? Are you saying that someone will try to harm us tonight?" I don't know." Hu Boer shook her head. She didn't dare to make a decision on such an important matter. Instead, she hesitated for a moment before saying, "I think we should wait for news from Commander Lu." Tian was usually a careful person. Otherwise, the 1st Cavalry Division wouldn't have achieved such great results under his leadership. However, he couldn't believe that someone would dare to target him. Was it that General Li Tong from Beiming? He should still be attacking the Jianghu left guard right now. How could he have the time to cause trouble for him? Just as he was in disbelief, footsteps came from outside the door. Then Lu Duo said, "2nd Regiment Commander Lu Duo wants to see Master." "Come in." Tian knew that Lu Duo must have brought some news. Moreover, from Lu Duo's somewhat anxious footsteps, Tian faintly felt that something was wrong. Lu Duo quickly appeared in front of Tian. As expected, his complexion was not good. He first nodded to the 3rd Captain, Hu Boer, who had reported to him. Then, he looked at Tian and said, "Division Master, I just sent someone to contact our scouts. There are more than 10 of them who have yet to contact us." "Which direction?" Tian knew that for the safety of the army, they had to send out close to 100 cavalrymen every night. Now that there were more than 10 cavalrymen who couldn't be contacted, it was very likely that there was a problem in one direction. "Northeast," Lu Duo said in a doubtful tone. It was no wonder that he had such an attitude. The Northeast was already under the control of the 5-star army. There shouldn't be any problems there. Even Tian was confused. Northeast? How is that possible? As he spoke, he walked over to the map. Yes, that's the territory of the 5-star army. There shouldn't be any problems there. But it is true that we have lost contact with the scouts there. Lu Duo was the person on duty tonight. He couldn't understand. Since we have lost contact, We have to be more vigilant. Hu Boer, who had been the first to report, was still very resolute. That's right. Tian, who quickly recovered from his shock. He looked at Lu Duo and said, Regiment Commander Lu, immediately gather the soldiers. Whether or not there really is a problem, we can't take any chances. Understood. After receiving the order, Lu Duo nodded and agreed. He then turned around and went to carry it out. Even Hu Bei stepped forward. He wanted to prepare his 3rd regiment for battle as well. Not even 15 minutes after the 2 regimental commanders left, gunshots rang out from outside the camp. The attack on the 1st Cavalry Division had begun. When Tianhu heard the gunshots, he walked out of the camp and looked towards the northeast in disbelief. How is that possible? They are really attacking us from behind. They even have a large number of firearms. Who are they? With a look of disbelief and doubt on his face, Tianhu got on his horse and said to Taimur Lu Duo, Hu Boer and Gong Feng, no matter who comes, we can't back down. It's night time now, the best time for our 1st Cavalry Division to fight at night. I want everyone to launch a counterattack. If there are too many enemies, retreat before daybreak and regroup with the Saha River Guards. Any questions? No. The 4 regimental commanders replied. Very good. Get ready for battle. Tianhu said with a solemn expression. Although tonight's opponent had indeed caught him off guard, he was not afraid. On the contrary, he wanted to see what kind of army dared to have designs on the world's #1 cavalry division. A division commander and 4 regimental commanders were about to issue orders to lead the cavalry to launch a counterattack under the cover of the night. However, before they could do anything, a cavalry warrior had already arrived in front of them. Division Commander, Wu Nanwang is here. Prepare for what? Tianhu was stunned. He thought he had heard wrongly. Division Commander, Bugnam of Gojoseon is here. He is personally leading the Black Knights towards us. They are less than 2 miles away. The soldier saw that Tianhu was still in a daze and repeated himself. This time, Tianhu heard everything clearly. Then, when he thought of the sneak attack, he came up with an idea. However, this was not the time to think about this. After looking at the faces of the 4 regimental commanders, he said, Let's go. Let's welcome Bugnam of Gojoseon together. Tianhu and the others had only walked a few hundred meters when Yang Qindong appeared in front of them with a group of black knights in black clothes, black armor, and black cloaks. Tianhu and the others immediately dismounted and knelt down to pay their respects. They shouted, Greetings to Bugnam of Gojoseon. Haha, sorry to disturb you in the middle of the night. You have worked hard. Bugnam of Gojoseon casually waved his hand and motioned for everyone to get up. The meaning behind this sentence made Tianhu raise his head again. Teacher, were you the one who arranged the sneak attack tonight? Not bad. You reacted quickly. In fact, your performance was not bad. You were able to gather the troops so quickly. This made the feast that I prepared for you unable to come true. While saying these words, Yang Qindong laughed heartily. Obviously, he was quite satisfied with this result. Yang Qindong was not angry. Tianhu's heart was at ease. Then he thought of something and said, Teacher, do we have any other problems? There is a problem. At this moment, Yang Qindong's expression became more serious. As I said before, even cavalry scouts need to have 2 groups, one in the open and one in the dark. When necessary, there needs to be a 3rd group to observe everything in the dark. However, you obviously did not do that this time. You only arranged for one group of cavalry to be in charge of guarding. This is not good. War is not child's play. Even if the northeast is your rear, you still have to act according to military discipline. By the way, who is in charge of guarding tonight? Bugnam of Gojoseon. It's your subordinate. The 2nd Regiment Commander, Lu Duo, walked out with a red face. Regiment Commander Lu, you bear a lot of responsibility for tonight's incident. In order to show military discipline, I will deduct half a year of your salary. Do you have any objections? By the way, you have the same leadership responsibility as your division commander. Half a year of your salary will also be deducted. Yang Qindong said in an unquestionable tone. Although the 1st Cavalry Division had already done a good job, after all, no one would have thought that there would be a problem in their rear. However, whether or not they had thought of it, a loophole was a loophole. Sometimes, a small loophole could put an army in danger. Because of this, Yang Chendong wanted to punish them. Moreover, it would not be too heavy as a warning. Your subordinate accepts the punishment. It was only half a year of salary. The symbolic meaning was more important than the actual meaning. Tianhu and Lu Duo admitted their mistakes. Good. Since everyone is awake, then don't sleep anymore. Get ready. We are going to send a gift to the Baiming army. After dealing with the matter in front of him, Yang Chendong's eyes were filled with the aura of an elite. This Li Tong had guts. He actually dared to attack a city that belonged to the 5-star army. If he did not show him how strong the 5-star army was, how could he show the strength of the 5-star army? Chapter 1155. The sky slowly brightened. More and more Baiming soldiers began to gather at the foot of the Jianghu left guard city. Countless scaling ladders were carried into the army. War drums beat and shouts shook the sky. Above the city gate tower, Bai Shuang narrowed his eyes and looked at everything below the city. He could see that the Baiming army's discipline seemed to be much stricter and the morale of the soldiers seemed to have improved a lot. Although he did not know what caused it, he still cautiously said to the soldiers beside him, "Inform everyone that the enemy's attack today will be very fierce. Tell everyone to be in their best condition." Baiming soldiers had eaten their fill last night. Even this morning, there was still shredded meat in the soup. They had never enjoyed such treatment before and were ready to do their best. Chen Dula did not sleep much last night, so his eyes were still a little red. However, he had to force himself to stay alert. The Jianghu left guard was his territory. If he could not get it back, it would be a great sin. Even if it was for his own life, he had to fight with all his might. Li Tong, who noticed this scene, looked at Chen Dula's appearance and laughed. "Don't worry. We have so many soldiers. It's only a matter of time before we take down the Jianghu left guard. This will still be your territory." It was no wonder that Li Tong was so happy. Once they took down this place, he would have made a great contribution. Not only would he have taken back the city, but he would also have defeated the 5-star army. When he reported this to the Imperial court, he would have made a great contribution. He would also be the first general to defeat the 5-star army on the battlefield. Just thinking about it made him feel good. Yes, General Li is right. We must take down the Jianghu left guard. Chen Dula said with a hint of ruthlessness in his voice. Both generals made up their minds and the general attack began. In order to achieve the goal of taking down the Jianghu left guard in one battle, they sent out 4 echelons in the first battle, a total of 20,000 soldiers to attack the city. They launched a wave of attacks from the east, south, west, and north. There were only 8,000 soldiers guarding the city, and they were divided into 4 towers. There were only 2,000 soldiers on each tower, and the weakness of the lack of military strength was quickly revealed. After only half an hour of fighting, some Baiming soldiers had already rushed up the city walls. Although they were quickly suppressed, the situation was still very dangerous. "Commander, let's switch from cavalry to infantry and reinforce the tower." Tong Long could tell that the situation was not good, so he anxiously suggested to White Shuang. "No, let the cavalry prepare to leave the city for battle." Bai Shuang shook his head. He knew very well that the 2,000 men he brought with him and the 2,500 men under Tong Long's command were all cavalrymen. Asking them to dismount and fight was tantamount to giving up their greatest advantage. It was not worth it. Furthermore, he didn't think that these 4,500 people would be able to turn the tide of the battle. They would only be able to hold on for a little longer. Looking into the distance, Bai Shuang's expression remained calm. However, in his heart he said anxiously, "Master, why aren't you here yet?" Could it be that the Jianghu left guard was going to give up just like that? The siege was still ongoing. As if he could see that victory was already decided, Li Tong sent out another 20,000 soldiers, divided into 4 echelons, and continued to increase the number of soldiers, causing the Jianghu left guard's defense to become shaky. When Chen Dula saw that the city was about to fall, the trace of worry in his heart finally disappeared. He laughed and said, "General Li is amazing. If this continues, the city will definitely fall today. When the 5-star army's reinforcements arrive, we can only leave regretfully." Humph. I hope that the 5-star army's reinforcements will arrive. I have arranged a feast for 30,000 soldiers at the back of the army. Li Tong arrogantly snorted and then laughed. I'm just afraid that some people won't dare to come. Otherwise, I'll let them see how powerful we are. General Li is wise, Chen Dula said flatteringly. There were indeed 30,000 Baiming soldiers at the back of the army. They had a large number of horse barricades, but because they were well hidden, they couldn't be seen from afar. Among them, there were also many archers and spearmen. They were specifically used to deal with the 5-star army's cavalry. As soon as they appeared, they would use bows and arrows to attack from afar. When they got closer, the spearmen would attack. After inflicting heavy damage, they would carry out a large number of horse barricades. At that time, the 5-star army's cavalry would be unable to return. This set of tactics was indeed suitable to deal with cavalry. If they weren't prepared, even if the 1st Cavalry Division arrived, they wouldn't be able to gain any advantage. They might even be heavily injured. However, Li Tong neglected one point. He forgot about Yang Chendong. Against this kind of formation, the cavalry would naturally suffer heavy losses. However, if it was changed to a flintlock attack, it would be completely different. In front of the cold front that could shoot further and aim more accurately, the archers and spearmen were just sending themselves to their deaths. Originally, they had already spread out a large net and were just waiting for the 5-star army's cavalry to appear. However, because of Yang Chendong's appearance and the 4th Lu Division's attack, the situation had changed greatly. The victory had been turned into a defeat. Of course, Li Tong didn't know all of this. If he knew that Bug Nam of Gojoseon and the 4th Lu Division would appear here, he wouldn't be so confident. He would have retreated to a nearby city to hide. Many times, war was also about information. The side with more accurate information would have the upper hand and be able to obtain the final victory. Yang Chendong brought the army over. In order to conserve the soldiers' stamina, they didn't rush over very quickly. When they saw the 30,000 Baiming army blocking their path, 4 hours had already passed since Li Tong gave the order to attack the city. Teacher, it seems like the Jianzhou left guard is in danger. I don't know if Commander Bai Shuang can hold them off. Why don't I lead the cavalry to charge first? Sensing the intensity of the battle ahead, Division Commander Tian Hu volunteered. Don't be in a hurry. You have to believe in Bai Shuang. He isn't someone who will just sit there and wait for death. Since there aren't any cavalry charging out of the city gates, it shouldn't be the end yet. What we need to do now is to deal a heavy blow to the Baiming army in front of us. Only then will we be able to completely turn the situation around. Yang Chendong's eyes were as sharp as a hawk's. He could immediately tell that the 30,000 Baiming army in front of them were here to block their path. Tian, who naturally didn't dare to question Yang Chendong's orders. He looked at the 30,000 Baiming army in front of him and said with pride, "Humph, it's only 30,000 Baiming infantry. Although there are a lot of them, they are nothing in front of the 1st Cavalry Division. Teacher, please wait a moment. Let's see how I break through them." As he spoke, Tian, who was about to order the brothers of the 1st Cavalry Division to attack. After all, winning a battle with a small number of people was a common occurrence in their eyes. "No." Yang Chendong grabbed Tian, who was about to leave, and said with bright eyes, "Can't you see that the enemy is full of archers and spearmen? They are all used against cavalry. Also, they are standing so close together. It's obvious that they are hiding something. They might even have something that is used against cavalry. It's not wise to rush out now." After Yang Chendong's analysis, Tian Hu didn't act rashly. It wasn't that he hadn't encountered a formation that was used against cavalry before. However, with the bravery of the soldiers and the tip of the arrows, there was nothing that couldn't be broken through. As for the archers' attacks, they were nothing in front of the 1st Cavalry Division, who had a blade and a shield. It was the same for the spearmen. As long as they charged forward fiercely enough, they could completely crush their opponents. Then, it would be time for the autumn wind to sweep away the fallen leaves. However, if the enemy was still hiding some trump cards, then it would be bad. After all, the 1st Cavalry Division's biggest weakness was that they were too few in number. They only had 8,000 men now. Even if they lost 3-1, they couldn't afford to lose so many men. "Teacher, there's no hurry. Let the 4th Master Lu take action. They have been holding back for a long time. Moreover, the formation in front of them doesn't have the slightest bit of obstruction. Yang Qindong saw Tianhu's hesitation and chuckled. Then, he turned to the fourth Master Lu's Ling Duqiang and said, Master Ling, is there any problem with leaving the first battle to you? Other than the fourth Master Lu, the rest were all cavalry. Ling Duqiang originally thought that he wouldn't have anything to do in this battle and was prepared to capture captives. But now that the first battle was going to be handed over to him, how could he possibly decline? Thus, he immediately agreed with a face full of joy. Sixth young master. Just wait and see. An opponent like this who doesn't even have the slightest bit of resistance is exactly like a meal on a plate for us fourth Master Lu, ha ha ha. The spearmen were afraid that the enemy would hide. If there were any obstructions, then it would be depressing. But now, the enemy was on the open ground. They were no different from live targets. As for the archers and spearmen, how could any of them reach them? Good, then quickly go and prepare. Yang Qindong was also worried that Bai Shuang wouldn't be able to defend the city and would rush out first. If that was the case, then once the Baiming army entered the Jian province left guard, it would take a lot more time and effort to capture him. This wasn't something that he wanted to see. After Ling Duqiang agreed, he went to prepare. The fourth Master Lu was originally part of the Cold Vanguard formation. It was an absolute elite force. After the order was given, the 4 regiments under it spread out and began to charge towards the 30,000 Baiming army blocking the way. The 30,000 Baiming army was currently gathered together out of boredom. The mission that Li Tong gave them was to stop any cavalry from the 5-star army that wanted to reinforce the Jian province left guard. However, seeing that their attacks were getting fiercer and fiercer, and that the city was about to be taken, there was still no sign of any reinforcements. Many of them began to slack off, thinking that no more enemies would appear. Chapter 1156. When the 4th Lu Division suddenly appeared in the distance and turned from a small black to a large black, it also attracted the attention of the soldiers. Some of the Kiliarchs and Centurions also shouted loudly, ordering their soldiers to prepare for battle. That's not right, they aren't cavalry? Some of the sharp-eyed soldiers saw that the enemy wasn't cavalry as General Li Tong expected. That's right, they aren't cavalry. What's going on? As the distance between the two sides decreased, more and more soldiers voiced out their doubts. Who cares what kind of soldiers they are? If cavalry can't charge over, infantry won't be able to either. Everyone, prepare yourselves. Especially the archers, wait for orders to fire. Although the Baiming general in charge of leading the troops was also curious, he still pretended to be calm due to his duty. As he gave his orders, he also arranged for a soldier to report everything that happened to General Li Tong. In order to reach the goal of quickly engaging the enemy, the soldiers of the 4th Lu Division rode their bicycles and rushed to the battlefield. Only when the distance between the two sides was 3 li did they stop their bicycles and change to running. Then, they rushed towards the Baiming army. They're here. They're so fast. Everyone, prepare for battle. Seeing the speed of the army, the Baiming general in charge of leading the troops had a trace of panic in his eyes. Especially the mounts of the 5-star army. They were something he had never seen or heard of before. People often feared things they didn't know, and this Baiming general was one such person. Among the 30,000 soldiers, 10,000 of them were Baiming archers. They had already received orders to draw their bows and reload them. Once the enemy got close, they would release their arrows and heavily injure the enemy. 1,000 meters. 800 meters, 600 meters, 400 meters, 300 meters. They stopped. The Northern Ming soldier who was in charge of observing the distance between the two sides cried out in alarm. He couldn't understand why they suddenly stopped charging. Just as he cried out in alarm, the commander of the 4th Army Division, Ling Duqiang, also gave the order to start shooting. More than 8,095 style guns, which far surpassed that era, spewed out tongues of flame at the same time. One could imagine how magnificent this scene was. With no one able to attack them, the 4th Division was like an aircraft carrier on land, constantly firing bullets as they slowly moved forward. As they continued to advance, one by one, the Baiming soldiers were hit by bullets and fell to the ground. They were like wheat being harvested, unable to struggle at all. This scene caused the 10,000 Northern Ming archers to be dumbfounded. Seeing their comrades fall to the ground one after another, and the arrows they shot were simply not enough to cover the distance. In other words, at this moment, They could only passively take a beating without the slightest ability to retaliate. The originally high morale of the soldiers quickly plummeted. No one knew who was the first to be afraid, as he threw down the bow in his hand and turned to flee. This action caused even more archers to abandon their bows and flee. When the situation began to spread, no matter how much the Beiming general shouted, it was no longer of any use. Hold on, hold on. Where are the pikemen? If there are any deserters, kill them without mercy. Seeing that the battle formation was about to be destroyed, and it was caused by deserters, the Beiming general's face burned with anger. After the pikemen received the order, although they were unwilling and did not want to attack their comrades, they could not disobey a military order. They had no choice but to stab forward with the pikes in their hands. In just a few flashes of pikes, more than 1,000 Beiming army archers fell, and they finally managed to stop their retreat. Where are the sharpshooters? Do you see that Beiming general on the horse? Shoot him down. Ling Daqiang was naturally overjoyed when he saw that the enemy's formation was in chaos after a wave of attacks. However, seeing that the situation was about to be stabilized, how could he be willing to give up? He scanned the surroundings with his binoculars and locked onto the Beiming general. There was no lack of sharpshooters in the cold vanguard army. They usually had good eyesight and were fed countless bullets. At this moment, when they heard their division commander's order, several sharpshooters searched for the Beiming general on the horse. Soon after, they locked onto him and the sound of gunfire rang out. Bullets whizzed out of the barrels and hit the Beiming general's body. The Beiming general was still shouting something, trying to turn the situation around. However, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. Then, another bullet hit him between the eyebrows. At this moment, he lost consciousness and fell from the horse in front of him. With the sudden death of the general, the Beiming army, without a unified command, was in complete chaos. Although there were still a few captains who were desperately shouting something, trying to get the position of commander, in this chaotic situation, their shouts were like small boats in the middle of a stormy sea. They were completely useless. After another round of gunfire, the archers of the 4th Division fell to the ground. The situation that had just stabilized was once again thrown into chaos. However, this time, no one gave the pikemen an order, and no one stopped the archers from retreating. Not only that, even the pikemen turned their spearheads and ran away. The army was defeated like a landslide. As the Beiming soldiers turned around and fled, many of them even threw their weapons to the ground in order to increase their speed. The situation on the battlefield began to change. As the Beiming army frantically retreated, the countless stakes and bags of iron caltrops that were hidden behind them were completely exposed. Division Commander Jianghu, who was already prepared, used his binoculars to clearly see this scene. He couldn't help but feel that it was a close call. If it wasn't for the 6th young master stopping him, the 1st Cavalry Division would have suffered a great loss. The stakes could affect the speed and offensive power of the cavalry. As for the iron caltrops, it was needless to say. With its 4 sharp points, it was enough to cause heavy damage to the cavalry. How ruthless! Since that's the case, don't blame us for being impolite. Come, all warriors, charge with me. Let's let them know the consequences of facing the wrath of the world's #1 cavalry division. Charge! The 8,000 cavalrymen who couldn't wait any longer roared and charged forward. The earth seemed to tremble as dust filled the air. Their momentum was unstoppable. In the middle of the Beiming army, the Beiming soldier who was sent to deliver a message saw Li Tong and Chen Dula. He reported the scene he saw. Not cavalry, but infantry? What's going on? Li Tong asked with a face full of surprise. The situation was far beyond his expectations, making Li Tong feel that he couldn't control the situation. We don't know. We only saw that the infantry were extremely fast. They seem to be riding on something that we don't recognize. That thing can increase a person's speed. The soldier who delivered the message tried his best to describe what he saw with words. Riding on something can increase their speed? Li Tong, who was repeating this sentence, suddenly changed his expression. As expected of a general from the capital of Beiming, Li Tong's knowledge was far greater than Chen Dula's. After hearing this, he quickly remembered something, and that was the bicycle. Although the bicycle wasn't produced in the outside world yet, some legends about it had already spread. Li Tong had heard of it before, but he had never seen it with his own eyes. When he thought of the bicycle, Li Tong naturally thought of Bug Nam of Gojoseon. It was said that only Bugnam of Gojoseon could command such an army. Could it be him? As the saying goes, a man's name is like a tree's shadow. Although many people thought that Bugnam of Gojoseon was being rebellious by commanding an army, no one dared to underestimate him. However, no one dared to look down on him. On the contrary, they were quite fearful of him. Li Tong was one such person. If it was really Bugnam of Gojoseon who appeared here, Li Tong would have to think carefully. This was an existence that was regarded as a war god. No one had ever taken advantage of him before. How could he resist such a person? Just as Li Tong was struggling in his heart, he suddenly heard a burst of firecracker-like sounds. This sound startled him, and he immediately thought of the Flintlock army. Li Tong, who had a trace of suspicion, was now certain. His originally confident spirit was hit. He almost instinctively shouted, "Oh no, it's Bugnam of Gojoseon. It seems that we can't take down the Jianghu left guard. Retreat. Prepare to retreat." "Is Bugnam of Gojoseon here?" Chen Dula, who was on the side, asked as if he hadn't asked the question yet. Then, he looked at Li Tong and said, "General Li, we have hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Even if he's here, what's there to be afraid of? We can still fight him." "Fight my ass. Didn't you hear those gunshots? On such an open land, what can we use to fight? Let's retreat." Li Tong was still very self-aware. This was not only because of the fear in his heart. More importantly, he didn't expect Yang Qindong to appear here, so he didn't make any preparations. Under such circumstances, it was obviously unfair to fight with him. As long as the army could be saved, there would be no need to worry about not having a chance to fight in the future. However, if the army was lost, there would be no chance for revenge. Li Tong was the commander. Naturally, no one dared to disobey his order to retreat. Although Chen Dula looked unwilling, he could only nod and agree in the end. Then, the Baiming army that was attacking the city began to retreat step by step. The siege situation also changed because of this. The tower that was about to be breached slowly became quiet. What's going on? Tong Long was prepared to fight to the death with the enemy, but the change in front of him made him a little confused. Commander Bai Shuang, who was prepared to fight outside the city, seemed to have thought of something. He then listened carefully and vaguely heard gunshots. He immediately laughed and said, I know, it must be the teacher. Haha, brothers, Bugnam of Gojoseon is here. It's time for us to fight back with all our strength." Chapter 1157. Bai Shuang had studied with Yang Qindong before, so he was quite familiar with the sounds of guns. Adding on the fact that the Baiming army suddenly stopped attacking the city, he immediately thought of a certain possibility. When they heard that Bugnam of Gojoseon had arrived, the 2,400 cavalry soldiers all began to cheer loudly. From this, it could be seen just how high of a position Yang Qindong held in these soldiers' hearts was. Even Tong Long, who had never seen Yang Qindong before, became extremely excited. During this period of time, he had only heard about Bugnam of Gojoseon, and he was about to come out of his cocoon. Now that he could finally see his face, how could he not be excited? Let's go, charge out with this commander and meet up with Bugnam of Gojoseon. Bai Shuang raised his two blades high, shouting loudly in excitement. Following the shout, the city gates opened from the inside, and 4,500 cavalry soldiers charged out like a whirlwind. Speaking of which, it was quite a coincidence. When Bai Shuang and the others charged out, it was precisely when the Baiming army was retreating. The 20,000 Baiming army that was originally arranged to deal with them had also just cleaned up their things and were retreating. Suddenly, intense battle cries sounded from behind them. When they turned around to take a look, their expressions immediately changed greatly. Li Tong, who had already left the large tent and was leading his soldiers to flee, also saw this scene. He sighed. These 5-star army cavalry were too cunning, actually charging out after he withdrew his defenses. Under this type of timing, even if he gave the order to launch a counterattack now, it was clearly too late. Retreat, retreat, retreat towards the 30,000 guards. Li Tong, who knew that the situation was already in his favor, didn't turn around, instead turning around and fleeing. Behind him was the vast and mighty Baiming army. In front of them, who would be afraid of death? That was why at this moment, They actually displayed their life's potential, each one running faster than the other. It was to the extent where not long after, the army responsible for transporting the supplies became the last group. "General, what do we do?" Seeing that there were already no more troops to protect him, the logistics officer in charge of transporting the supplies asked the leading general. Closing his eyes, the general knew that once the provisions were lost, he would be beheaded according to military discipline. But now that he didn't have the ability to protect these provisions, he simply shook his head and said, "Forget it, they were the ones who abandoned us. It's not that we didn't try our best. Tell the brothers, if you want to escape, then run. If you can't escape, then surrender and wait for the 5-star army to come and take over. If we go like this, General, we will die. Why don't we burn the provisions? That way, we'll be able to account for it," the logistics officer suggested. "No." The general immediately shook his head. "If we really do that, we will definitely anger the 5-star army. At that time, we won't even have a chance to live. All right, I've made up my mind. If you want to run, then run. If you don't want to run, then stay here with me and wait for the 5-star army to pick us up." Most of the people transporting the provisions were people with average military skills. How could their speed be compared to the speed of war horses? Most of them stayed behind. Only a small number of them ran away with the mentality of a fluke. After a stick of incense's time, Commander Bai Shuang brought the cavalry over. Along the way, who knew how many of the Baiming army were killed and how many were captured? When he arrived in front of the transport team and saw that this team of thousands of people was actually waiting for him, he was very curious and came over on his horse. Surrendered General Zhao Xing greets the general. A general wearing a Kiliaka's armor half knelt in front of Bai Shuang. "General Zhao, why didn't you all escape? At the very least you can burn the provisions. That way, even if you escape, you can account for it to your superiors, right?" Bai Shuang asked with a trace of suspicion. The situation was so abnormal that he had to be careful in case the other party was pretending to surrender. "We can't burn them." Zhao Xing shook his head and said, "With these provisions, countless people can eat and many people can survive. If we burn them, then the only ones who will suffer will be the soldiers and civilians who have no food to eat. Zhao Xing can't do something that would incur the wrath of the heavens and people just to avoid a punishment." Who would have thought that a mere chili arch in charge of escorting grain would have such knowledge? This was beyond White Shuang's expectations. He carefully sized up Zhao Xing's appearance again and memorized it in his heart. Then he took out a token from his bosom and said, "This is my position token. Take this back to Jian Province's left guard city. If anyone asks you about the provisions, you can show this token. Do you have any questions?" After taking the token, Zhao Xing nodded solemnly. "General Bai, don't worry. I know what to do." "Good. We still have to chase after the enemy. You can go about your business." After he finished speaking, Bai Shuang spurred his horse and continued to chase after the Baiming army. He didn't turn back to look at Zhao Xing, as if nothing had happened. When the group was far away, Tong Long, who was following in the group, asked Bai Shuang with a puzzled expression, "Commander, do you really believe that Zhao Xing won't escape and will deliver the provisions to the city?" "I'll take a gamble. Also, teacher is here. This area will belong to the 5-star army. He won't be able to escape even if he wants to." Bai Shuang chuckled and continued to spur his horse forward. He did have the intention to test Zhao Xing. If this person really delivered the provisions to Jian Province's left guard city, then he would report this matter to Yang Chendong. This person might be a talent. On the other hand, if this person escaped, then he would also report this matter to Yang Chendong. Anyone who dared to deceive the 5-star army should be prepared for revenge. This was just a small interlude. It wouldn't affect the overall situation. Bai Shuang led thousands of cavalry and chased after them. Although they didn't catch up with Li Tong and Chen Dula, they still caught up with many of the Baiming army that had fallen behind. In the end, they brought back 5,000 captives. In this battle, the Baiming army retreated without a fight. They lost a total of 40,000 men. 7,000 of them died in battle. The rest were all captives. When Bai Shuang brought the 5,000 captives back to the Jian Province's left guard city, Yang Chendong had already entered the city and was listening to reports from all sides. When Bai Shuang and Tong Long appeared in the main hall of the residence, Yang Chendong's loud laughter rang out. Bai Shuang, it has been hard on you this time. You deserve the most credit for being able to destroy the enemy. Teacher Xia, this is what Bai Shuang should do. By the way, teacher, this person is Tong Long. He made a great contribution by defeating the Jian province's left-guard city without shedding a drop of blood. Bai Shuang took this opportunity to recommend Tong Long. This was the first time Tong Long met Yang Chendong. Although he was older, for some reason, when he saw Yang Chendong, he was shocked by the powerful aura emitted by him. He couldn't help but kneel on the ground. This general, Tong Long, greets Bugnam of Gojoseon. May you live 1,000 years. Haha, there's no need for that. We can talk casually. Yang Chendong chuckled. Then he sized up Tong Long. He found that this person was not only handsome, but also extraordinary. He was very happy. After considering that the other party had made a great contribution, he said, Tong Long, this king wants to establish a reinforced cavalry regiment of Liaodong. How about you be the first commander? By the way, this is a cavalry unit of 5,000 people. Do you have the confidence to lead them well? Tong Long had just been promoted to battalion commander. It was only because of the war situation that he was able to lead 2,500 men. Once the situation returned to normal, he could only lead 400 men. Now that the number had suddenly increased by more than 10 times, how could he not be excited and grateful? What are you waiting for? Quickly thank Bugnam of Gojoseon. Seeing that Tong Long was a little dumbfounded, Bai Shuang immediately reminded him. Oh, this subordinate thanks Bugnam of Gojoseon for promoting me. I will definitely be a good commander and create a strong army. I will not disappoint Bugnam of Gojoseon. Haha, good. Yang Chendong nodded in satisfaction. Baiming has the Liaodong Iron Cavalry. My 5-star army also has a Liaodong cavalry regiment. When the time comes, we will see who is more powerful. Right now, this unit is still lacking some core strength. Do you have any talents that you can recommend? Yang Chendong asked with a smile. A cavalry unit of 5,000 people was only a regiment. It could be seen how much importance Yang Chendong placed on this unit. If this kind of unit was only given to Tong Long, no one would be at ease. The others had to be personally appointed by Yang Chendong in order to ensure the loyalty of the unit. Everyone was clear about this point. Immediately, everyone suggested some candidates. Soon, there were suitable candidates for the 12 battalion commanders of the Liaodong Iron Cavalry Regiment. Next was the vice commander. Regarding this problem, no one had any good opinions. First, we have to look at the responsibilities of the vice commander. According to the rules of the 5-star army, the vice commander was to assist the commander in managing the entire unit. Only when the commander was not around would the vice commander have the right to make decisions. Normally, the vice commander would be in charge of logistics. Only with good service would the unit be able to win more battles. Considering that the Liaodong Cavalry Regiment was a reinforced unit, there would be many difficult missions in the future. This vice commander would not only be able to manage logistics, it would be best if he could also fight well. This kind of talent was naturally hard to find. Everyone looked at each other and couldn't find a suitable candidate. Although there were vice commanders in each division, no one wanted to recommend their vice commander. After all, it wasn't a promotion, it was just a transfer. Looking at the current Liaodong Iron Cavalry Regiment, it was likely that the vice commander wouldn't even be considered a transfer. No one had a good candidate. Yang Chendong asked with a calm expression, "What? Is no one willing to give up?" Seeing that Yang Chendong seemed to be a little unhappy, everyone was a little anxious at the moment. They were wondering if they should recommend someone from their own army's deputy commander. But before they could say anything, Commander Bai Shuang suddenly thought of someone and said, "Teacher, I have a suitable candidate. It's just that I don't know much about him. Why do I need teacher to look at him?" Chapter 1158. Suitable, but not understanding. This sentence itself was somewhat contradictory. Bai Shuang's words also attracted everyone's attention. Considering that he didn't make it clear, Bai Shuang smiled bitterly and explained in detail how he met Zhao Xing on the way. "Zhao Xing? I know this person. He escorted the provisions to Zhenzhou's Huawei city. Because it was related to logistics, I went to take a look. I still have a deep impression of this person, Beta Persei, who was standing beside Yang Chendong, said after Bai Shuang finished speaking. Did he really escort the provisions back? Bai Shuang's eyes flashed as he asked. That's right. Beta Persei chuckled and continued. Not only did he transport the provisions back, but he also brought 2,108 surrendered soldiers. According to him, he had a total of 2,200 soldiers. 92 of them escaped for some reason, and most of them came with him to surrender. Oh, by the way, when I went, his soldiers were lined up neatly. Even the weapons in their hands were placed neatly together. To be honest, it's the first time I've seen someone surrender like this. The other officers couldn't help but nod in agreement. It wasn't that he hadn't seen people surrender before, but most of them were disheveled and dispirited, looking as if they had lost all hope in life. Their weapons were thrown everywhere, so he had never seen such a carefree and effortless surrender before. Hearing this, even Yang Chendong couldn't help but be curious. There's such a wonderful person? Come, bring him here so I can see him. I'll go. Beta Persei agreed. I'll go with second brother. Bai Shuang thought for a moment and stepped forward. He thought highly of Zhao Xing. Since his teacher wanted to see him, he wanted to say a few words to remind him. The two walked out of the main hall together. Yang Chendong looked at the people who stayed behind, and his gaze fell on the face of the 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Tian Hu. Commander Tian, how do you feel about this battle? Awesome, Tian Hu said without thinking. In this battle, the 4 regiments of cavalry had killed and captured twice the number of enemies. Most importantly, there were almost no heavy casualties on their side. The number of dead and injured did not exceed 100. This kind of difference in casualties greatly comforted him. However, he immediately recalled that they had almost been ambushed. Thinking about how the dozen or so cavalry scouts had been surrounded by the 4th Division and the Black Knights, and how not a single one had managed to escape, his old face turned red again. Tian Hu's face suddenly turned red, which made Yang Chendong swallow back the words he wanted to say. Sometimes it was okay to give a little pressure, but if the pressure was too much, it was very likely that it would be unable to bear the burden and eventually collapse. The 1st Cavalry Division was his weapon. Naturally, he didn't want anything to happen to it. This time, Yang Chendong called out Tian Hu's name not to remind him of anything, but to consider the current situation. He wanted to expand the size of the 1st Cavalry Division. On the grasslands, there was a very powerful Baiming army called the Liaodong Cavalry. It was said that their strength was extraordinary, and they had a large number of people. They had already expanded from 50,000 to 70,000. Faced with the cavalry elites who came and went like the wind, firearms could only be used to defend, but not to attack. Yang Chendong set his sights on the 1st Cavalry Division. Cavalry against cavalry, speed against speed. Even if they couldn't win, they could at least suppress the threat they brought to him. Looking at the 1st Cavalry Division, they indeed had the qualifications and strength to fight against any opponent. The only thing they lacked was the number of soldiers, only 10,000. Against an enemy 7 times their number, even if they were powerful, they wouldn't be able to gain any advantage. Therefore, expanding the number of soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division became an inevitable matter. Originally, Yang Chendong wanted to expand the division into an army. However, considering that there was no suitable source of soldiers, it was very likely that this would reduce their combat strength. Therefore, he thought about expanding the division on a small scale first. For example, each regiment would be expanded from 2,000 to 4,000 people. This way, it wouldn't reduce their combat strength too much, and it would also increase the number of people, which would be more useful at critical times. With this thought in mind, Yang Chendong looked at Tian Hu and took the initiative to suggest, Commander Tian, if you were to choose these captives first, do you have the confidence to double the current number of soldiers without affecting your own combat strength? Tian Hu was already prepared to be reprimanded by Yang Chendong. After all, he was careless in the first place. He only arranged for sentries to scout the cavalry and didn't arrange for hidden sentries. Fortunately, it was Yang Chendong who came to test him this time. If it was really the enemy, the consequences would be unimaginable. If he made a mistake, he would be punished with a plank. Tian Hu didn't become arrogant because of his military exploits. He didn't expect that Yang Chendong didn't want to talk about this. Instead, he wanted to expand the division. Tian Hu's eyes immediately lit up. As the opponents became stronger and stronger, especially powerful forces like Baiming, which could easily take out millions of soldiers, he felt that the lack of military strength had become the biggest obstacle restricting his performance. He wanted to raise this request to Yang Chendong not too long ago. However, considering that the 1st Cavalry Division's equipment was excellent and the intensity of their training was high, once they expanded, he was afraid that he would have to pay a large sum of money every month. Over the years, he had accumulated a lot of money. This was a matter of great importance. Tian Hu suppressed his thoughts and didn't mention it. He didn't expect that Yang Chendong would take the initiative to mention it. How could he miss such an opportunity? He immediately stepped out of the formation and said, "Teacher, this student has already thought about this problem. As long as we carefully select and cooperate with the new veterans, our combat strength shouldn't decrease. In fact, it can definitely be improved. After all, with more soldiers, their momentum would be stronger. The deterrence and attack power to the enemy would also be greater. Well, since you're so confident, then it's settled. At the very least, how many people should we expand? It would be best if we could double the current strength. Of course, if we really don't have that many suitable soldiers, we can't force it. This time, what we want is a strong army, not quantity. As for how much money you need, you can tell Beta Persei later and ask him to give it to you." Yang Chendong wanted Tian Hu to say this. If the executor was so confident, what else did he have to worry about? This time, he decided to increase the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division because he was very satisfied with the other party's performance. His actions of probing further confirmed his thoughts. Such an army should be larger in number so that they could better display their strength. As for the problem of money, it really wasn't too big of a problem. Not to mention anything else, the gold and silver mines discovered in the Japanese Empire were enough to solve the current financial pressure on Xianxia. Not to mention, many of the powers in Southeast Asia were now under the Yang faction, allowing them to sell more of their products. There were also many non-core items that were directly exported to other continents through the sea, bringing in countless silver taels. Whether it was an army, a force or a country, nothing could be done without money. Yang Chendong, who had known this for a long time, had never slacked off in this aspect. Now, it seemed that the effect was very significant. This was also the foundation that allowed him to conquer the world and where his confidence lay. "Thank you, teacher. This student will do it in a while," Tian Hu said excitedly. If it weren't for the fact that Yang Chendong was presiding over the meeting, he was afraid that he would have already gone to deal with this matter. As he spoke, the sound of footsteps came from outside the hall. Beta Persei, Bai Shuang, and Zhao Xing walked into the hall. Then, the two in front saluted and stood at attention. Only Zhao Xing knelt on the ground and shouted, "Long live Yang Chendong. You may rise." Yang Chendong looked at Zhao Xing, who was now 7 feet tall, and said indifferently, "Thank you, Bugnam of Gojoseon." Zhao Xing said as he stood up and slowly raised his head. Yang Chendong's appearance reflected in his eyes. "I've heard about your matter. Since you're willing to submit to the 5-star army, this king naturally welcomes you. The provisions were escorted by you, but how do you want to deal with them?" Zhao Xing spoke slowly, as if he was asking for advice, but also as if he was testing him. "Me?" Zhao Xing stretched out his right index finger and pointed at himself, then asked carefully, "I'm just a surrendered general. How can I have the right to discuss such matters?" "Hey, just say it." Bai Shuang could tell that the teacher was testing the waters, so she reminded him softly from the side. Zhao Xing had a good impression of Bai Shuang. Just like on the way here, this person had reminded him a lot. For example, he shouldn't be too afraid when he saw Bugnam of Gojoseon. On the contrary, if there was a chance, he should express his thoughts. Only by leaving a deep impression would he be put in an important position. Now that Bai Shuang had reminded him, Zhao Xing decided to voice his thoughts. He opened his mouth and said, "Bugnam of Gojoseon has given this surrendered general a chance, then this surrendered general will explain it to you." These provisions were snatched by Chen Dula through the second round of rations. In the process, he even accidentally killed some people, causing the surrounding people to complain. "If it's possible, can you give some of these provisions to the people? To be honest, their lives are too hard. This is a bitter cold land, and the winter is very long. As a result, the crops grow very slowly. In order to get these provisions, they have to pay a lot more than others. Zhao Xing explained some of the things he knew in great detail. He was originally a child of the Baiming army. From the moment he was born, his fate could not be changed. However, he was not a person who accepted his fate. Instead, after knowing that everything was irreversible, he actively faced it. He had practiced martial arts since he was young, regardless of whether it was summer or winter. When he had time, he would go to the nearby private schools to listen to the teachers' lectures. Chapter 1159. Under the guidance of a teacher whose interest was the best, he learned many things and understood some of the principles of life. Relying on his own efforts, he became 1,000 captains. With a high position, he was able to see more of the hardships of the commoners. However, as a lowly person, his words carried little weight, and he did not know what he could do. This time, when the Emperor of Baiming sent out troops to aid Liaodong, Zhao Xing, who had no backing, became a member of this difficult task. Originally, he wanted to fight for a chance to perform, but he did not expect Li Tong to value him and let him become 1,000 captains. It was because of this that he saw more of the dark side. When he saw that the food was stolen from the commoners, and that the commoners did not know how to survive this winter, he would secretly cry while eating. Now that he had the chance to express his views in front of Bugnam of Gojoseon, who loved the commoners like his own children, how could he let go of such an opportunity? Then, he explained everything in detail. When he spoke about the depths of his emotions, he even shed tears. Influenced by Zhao Xing, some of the officers in the other halls also involuntarily shed tears. Many of them had experienced hardships, and listening to these words, they seemed to be pulled back to the past. Only Yang Chendong sat there expressionlessly, not affected in the slightest. This was not to say that his heart was hard, but because he had seen too much, he had long become numb. If he cried whenever something happened, how could he have everything he had now? A strong person must have a strong heart. Rather than crying whenever something happened, it was better to think of a way to change everything. This was what a leader should do. Zhao Xing, who stood there, spoke for the time it took for 2 incense sticks to burn. Only when he was almost done did he realize that this was not his own military camp, but Bugnam of Gojoseon's discussion hall. He immediately shut his mouth, and then with a look of begging for forgiveness, he once again knelt on the ground. Only after Zhao Xing finished speaking did everyone regain their senses. Then, their gazes landed on Yang Chendong, who was sitting at the head of the table. The main hall once again quieted down, and Yang Chendong's voice resounded in everyone's ears. The common people live in poverty, and this is the incompetence of the great Ming dynasty's government. That's why we have to change everything. Since they can't do it, then let's find someone who can. I believe this will be a blessing for the people. Bugnam of Gojoseon is wise, the generals replied in unison. Yang Chendong raised his hands and pressed them down. With just this movement, the main hall returned to silence. Then he looked at Zhao Xing, who was kneeling on the ground, and said, "The people are indeed suffering, but there isn't much food in the army either. If we want to fight, we need to maintain sufficient physical strength and nutrition. Therefore, it's better to provide these rations to the soldiers first." When Yang Chendong said this, it was equivalent to making a decision. Naturally, the others did not have any objections. Even if they did, they would only report it to Yang Chendong in private. However, Zhao Xing did not know about this rule. He thought that his words had already convinced Bugnam of Gojoseon, or at least the other generals. He did not expect this to be the result. Thus, he said, "Bugnam of Gojoseon, can't you give a portion of the food to the common people? At least let them survive this year's cold winter." Are you doubting this king's decision? Yang Chendong, who had a calm expression a moment ago, suddenly changed his expression. A powerful pressure involuntarily landed on Zhao Xing's body. Zhao Xing, who originally wanted to say something, was suppressed by this pressure. His face instantly flushed red, and the feeling of being stared at by a wild beast made it difficult for him to even breathe. What Yang Chendong used was a visual attack that was close to the Grand Master level. Under this aura, unless one had a firm belief, not many people could withstand it. Being targeted, Zhao Xing's expression was extremely ugly. He was using all his strength to resist all of this. Seeing that Yang Chendong seemed to be burning with anger, For some reason, the fear in his heart became weaker and weaker. At this moment, his mind was filled with the suffering of the common people after they did not have food to eat, and even death. The more he thought about it, the more determined he became. Zhao Xing knew that if he did not say these words today, he would not have the chance to say them in the future. Then, he did not know where he got the strength from, but he actually broke through the layers of pressure from the visual attack. He forced himself to raise his head and said, "Bugnam of Gojosian, everyone says that you love the common people like your own children. Please make a decision for the common people of Liaodong. I, Zhao Xing, thank you on behalf of them." When he finished speaking, thump, thump, Zhao Xing kowtowed non-stop. Even when blood flowed from his forehead, he still had no intention of stopping. "Zhao Xing, what are you doing? Hurry up and stop." Seeing that Zhao Xing was actually using this to threaten his teacher, Bai Shuang was so scared that his face turned pale. He reached out to stop Zhao Xing. "Commander Bai, thank you for your kindness. I have made up my mind. If Bugnam of Gojosian does not agree, I will kowtow until I die here." Zhao Xing's eyes were filled with determination. He had worked hard since he was young, but other than the title of Jianghu, it could be said that he had achieved nothing. Now that he had become a surrendered general, he was afraid that he would lose the title of Jianghu in the future. If that was the case, what was the meaning of life? He might as well take advantage of this opportunity to stand up for the common people. Even if he died, it could be considered as having been born into this world. At this moment, Zhao Xing was going all out against Yang Chendong. The other officers were shocked. They had never seen anyone who dared to treat Yang Chendong with such an attitude. They could even imagine the consequences that Zhao Xing would have to face. Admittedly, Zhao Xing's words were indeed moving, and it could be seen that he was a general who truly cared for the people. However, the words of a lowly person did not carry much weight. Furthermore, Yang Chendong was not wrong. Before the large amounts of supplies were sent up, the army needed food. Especially now that there were tens of thousands of captives. These people needed food the moment they opened their mouths. If they were not appeased, it would be hard to avoid big problems. Everyone had their own reasons, so no one else could say anything. They could only wait for Yang Chendong to make a decision. Zhao Xing was also a man of few words. After saying these words, he closed his eyes, looking like he could do whatever he wanted. The atmosphere in the main hall became very tense because of this. Everyone's heartbeats could be faintly heard. On the main seat, Yang Chendong had already retracted his aura. He did not expect Zhao Xing to be able to break through his eye attack. From this, it could be seen that this person was indeed a talent. Those words came from the bottom of his heart. If he was not prepared to die, he would not be able to do this. It was rare to have someone who loved the people so much. Yang Chendong had a good impression of him. After all, not everyone who cared about the people could face death with equanimity. Of course, he had to use such a talent for himself. Just as everyone was waiting for Yang Chendong to announce the result, he said, "Order, promote Zhao Xing to be the deputy commander of the Liaodong Cavalry Reinforced Regiment. He is to assist Tong Long in the preparation and training of the army. Order the other divisions to prepare for the army's departure in 3 days." The sudden order confused everyone, especially Zhao Xing, whose mind was filled with questions. Not only was he not killed, he was promoted instead. What was going on? He was completely confused. However, he still remembered one thing. What about the food for the people during winter? Thinking of this, he directly asked, "Bugnam of Gojosian food?" At this time, Zhao Xing did not show any excitement because he was promoted. Instead, he was still concerned about the food problem of the people. Yang Chendong was very impressed. "The food problem is easy to solve. For this year and next year, I will not collect any agricultural tax from the people of Liaodong, which is the 3 eastern provinces. The food collected can be used for our own use. There won't be any problems, right?" The reason why he was worried that the people of the 3 eastern provinces would not have any food to survive the winter was that Bugnam of Gojosian would send people to collect food at the end of autumn. If the food tax was removed, the harvest this year would be enough for the new year and they would be much richer. At this moment, Zhao Xing finally understood that it was not that Bugnam of Gojosian did not hear what he said. He was just testing him. Thinking of how the people of the 3 eastern provinces would not starve to death if the agricultural tax was not collected for 2 years, Zhao Xing did not know how many lives this would save. He immediately fell to the ground again and shouted, "Long live Bugnom of Gojoseon! All right, you are thinking for the people. How can I not fulfill your wish? They will be my people in the future. Of course, I will not watch them starve. This matter will be announced in a while. There is no need to mention it. Now, you only have 5 days to prepare the army. We can't wait any longer at the beginning city." When he said this, Yang Chendong's eyes had a hint of seriousness. "Sixth young master, don't we have to fight Li Tong and the others? Will they come to find trouble with us because of this?" Ling Daqiang, the commander of the 4th Army Division, asked worriedly when he heard that they were going to enter the grasslands. "That's why we have to leave some people behind to watch them." Why don't the 4th Army Division stay behind? You also know that although we have opened up a supply route to the beginning city, it is not very safe. Therefore, we need someone to stay behind to continue suppressing the Baiming army. This task belongs to the 4th Army Division. Yang Chandong said with a look as if he had long prepared for this. When Ling Daqiang heard this, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. "Sixth young master, we, the 4th Army Division, will carry out your decision." This was not because Ling Daqiang raised a question, so Yang Chendong arranged for them to stay behind. It was because he already had this idea. In comparison, although the 4th Army Division had bicycles in their hands and could increase their speed, the journey was too long. By the time they arrived, their legs would not listen to them. It would be easier for the cavalry to travel. Besides, they would only be defending and not attacking. The 4th Army Division, who were all firearms, would be of great use. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.